Me? A slick-haired guy? Severus stared around the office, feeling dislocated. The room was all British medieval, dark, spare, Victorian, down to the plain gray cashmere rug. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with books, most in English, some in strange scripts he didn't recognize. Strangest of all, whether the titles were in English or in those unknown alphabets, he could read them as if they were his own language. Potions and draughts, advanced potion making, powerful potions, dark forces, a guide to self-protection, theories of magical defense, jinxes, hexes, and curses. Books about magic clustered together like a library within a library. The decor, the knowledge flooding his head, the alien surge of memories, everything screamed the same thing. He'd transmigrated. 10 minutes ago, he'd been a new teacher on his way to report for duty. Crossing a bridge, he'd watched a chain of people topple into the river after an electric scooter struck someone, and then he'd fallen in too. Now he was here, in another life, in a British man's office. With an odd, unwelcome intimacy to the books on the shelves, they were not just readable, they were his memories in paper form. The surname that slid into his mind made him stop cold. Snape. He ran through the memories that weren't his and realized, with a sinking clarity, whose body he occupied. Brilliant, complex potion knowledge folded into reflex. A bleak, miserable childhood. A girl with bright emerald eyes who had once lit everything up. The marauders and their cruelty, the curse that left him hung upside down, the ugly word mudblood he never forgave, the path that drove him to follow the Lord whose name must not be spoken, betrayals, pleas, secrets, death notices. Becoming the potions professor at Hogwarts, head of Slytherin, everything he'd only ever seen in a series of films came into focus. The greasy hair, the perpetual scowl, the bat-like robes, the half-blood prince phase, the ultimate tragic figure of lost childhood sweethearts. He had transmigrated into Severus Snape. A long breath out, then he walked to the full-length mirror at the back of the office. Staring back was a pale face with dark, hollow eyes and shoulder-length hair so slick and black it seemed oiled. The reflection confirmed it. Where was the original Snape? For a moment, Severus thought he saw something like a mirage, a smaller, translucent version of himself inside the body, bewildered and shocked. "Who are you?" he said aloud. The ghost inside him met his gaze with the same cold, still look Severus had imagined. The apparition, Severus Snape, but not the one standing now, quickly steadied himself and replied in a tone like frost. He tried to force himself out of the body, to reclaim it, but he couldn't move an inch. His form was trapped, a spirit held captive. Worse, no one else could see or hear him. "You can't be here," the ghost hissed. "No matter who you are, no matter what you did to steal my body, you mustn't think you can replace me. This is Hogwarts. Albus Dumbledore is always here. He will notice you. He will drag you out. He might be on his way right now." Severus sank into the chair before the desk and let out a long, weary laugh, one that was more defeat than mirth. He had expected to be disoriented, maybe frightened, but the truth hit him with a peculiar calm. His life, as this man, was already mapped out. Unlike other transmigrators who started as unknowns and had a chance to claw their way to something new, he had landed where the story had already been written. "You're one of the murderers of the Savior? I saw the movies," he muttered to himself. "I know how this ends." In the original timeline, there were only two options he could foresee. The Snape who turned fully to Lord Voldemort and helped kill Harry, impossible under Dumbledore's nose at Hogwarts, or the Snape who died protecting Harry to atone. Either way, his role was fixed. If he wanted to clear his name, the story demanded sacrifice. If he wanted to survive, he had to play a part he detested. The ghost inside him took a measured breath and forced his voice into something like reason. Now that the intruder had his memories, he said, the intruder ought to know what must happen next. "Dumbledore and I made an agreement," Ghost Snape said. "He will return sooner or later. For now, publicly, you must maintain hatred for Harry, make him your target. But secretly, behind the scenes, you must protect him. That is how you redeem yourself and how we fulfill the plan." Severus stared at him for a long moment, feeling the old man's intensity like a cold draught. He had no illusions about Dumbledore's influence, no trust for Voldemort, and no taste for becoming a villain. Still, he did not like the idea of being told what to do. "You are right," he said suddenly, rising from the chair. His voice was casual. He deliberately kept it light. Ghost Snape blinked, surprised at his immediate compliance. Better, the spirit thought. If the thief would cooperate, maybe the plan could continue. The ghost, now resigned to existing as a spirit, clung to the hope that Dumbledore could reverse anything, if only the thief would take him to Dumbledore and follow instructions. "Let's go find Dumbledore," Ghost Snape urged, slipping back into that old, passive-aggressive timbre he never quite lost. "Tell him everything. Perhaps he can undo this. If not, he'll instruct you how to behave in my place." Severus unpinned something from his robes, a wand, small and familiar, and by pure habit, flicked it. The black wizard's robe on the nearby rack lifted as if summoned and slid over his shoulders, buttoning itself. It felt oddly comfortable, like slipping back into a role he hadn't wanted but now occupied. "Who told you I intended to tell Dumbledore the truth?" he asked, but he said it like someone testing a theory rather than seeking reassurance. Ghost Snape's expression hardened. "Then what will you do?" Severus's answer was blunt, almost pleased at how simple it sounded. "I'll apply to be allowed to visit the Dursleys, Harry's aunt's house, right away. He's still miserable there for 2 years before his Hogwarts letter arrives. I'll get him out. If I can win him over as his teacher sooner, I might be able to change what everyone thinks of me." For a heartbeat, the ghost was wordless. Then, from somewhere deep inside the living body, the trapped spirit forced out a rigid, hurt question, teeth gritted and cold as ever. Did you listen to anything I just said?" Severus blinked, feigning obliviousness with a faint, insolent smile. "Oh? Did you say something?" Severus had not made this decision lightly. Redemption meant death. Falling to darkness meant death too. Better, he told himself, to struggle with everything he had and try to take a different path. He would not follow the original Severus Snape's course. That life had led inevitably to a meaningless end. He refused to be the greasy-haired man consumed by resentment and regret. If he was to live, it would be by changing the plot entirely. There was still time. Harry Potter had not yet begun at Hogwarts. Lord Voldemort had not fully returned. Severus had prepared plans. Hogwarts was on summer break and the castle was mostly empty. From his dungeons to the headmaster's office, he met no living soul. Only a few drifting ghosts, none of them the 4 house ghosts who'd been prominent in the old story. The ghost of Snape, however, had watched him leave with a cold, contemptuous amusement, as if the new Severus were being hopelessly arrogant, daring to march straight to Dumbledore with nothing but his name and the intention to fetch Harry Potter now. Preposterous, the ghost seemed to say. At the headmaster's office, a stone gargoyle stood sentry. Its voice rumbled when Severus stepped forward. "Password." "Honeycake," he said. The password came to him over the past 2 days from the memories of the original Severus. The gargoyle leapt aside obediently. Some tastes, apparently, did not change. He climbed the spiral staircase that turned on its own and pushed open the gleaming oak door with its brass griffin knocker. Inside was the circular office, bright and lined with snoozing portraits of past headmasters and headmistresses. A huge table with clawed legs dominated the room. On its perch behind the head of the table sat a gold and red bird, Fawkes. Dumbledore was there, spectacles perched on his nose, studying a letter. Even on summer break, the old busy bee could not entirely set aside his work. There was, amusingly, a smudge of cream on his white beard. He looked up as Severus entered. His eyes, blue and unfathomable, seemed to look straight through him. "Oh, Severus, brewing Felix Felicis give you trouble? Do come and join me for tea. I can be generous. There's lemon and honey soda and cake." Severus took the chair opposite without affectation. "I finished the Felix Felicis 2 days ago. I thought you already asked me about it last night at dinner." The headmaster blinked, then smiled sheepishly. "Memory is a fickle thing with age. Perhaps I should be drinking more memory potions." "Your Pensieve should serve." Severus reached for the soda that had appeared and took a long swallow. It was cloyingly sweet. He set the glass down and met Dumbledore's smile with a level gaze, running a hand through the greasy hair that fell over his shoulders. "I've worked out a few things recently. First order of business. I'm going to wash my hair." Dumbledore raised an eyebrow. "A surprising resolution. Taking care of one's hair is a most admirable field of study. Not only that, Severus didn't look away. He spoke quietly, but with an edge of gravity. I want to change some of the plans we spoke of before. Dumbledore steepled his fingers, listening. For example, for Harry Potter. Severus kept his voice steady. I want to take him out from his aunt and uncle's house for a while, to have him with me so he can learn things beforehand, to prepare for what's coming. Dumbledore's brow knitted. Why do you feel that is necessary? You know that life with the Dursleys is not good for a child. That childhood has nothing to recommend it. Severus's tone was plain but fierce. It will shape him, and not for the better. If you truly care for him, if you truly want what's best, perhaps you should allow me to try. Dumbledore's hands shifted uneasily. Harry will be safest with his blood. But that man hasn't returned yet, Severus interrupted. We cannot pin his entire future on a hypothetical protection that may never materialize and gamble with a child's formative years. Silence fell over the headmaster's office. Even the portraits had stilled their soft snoring. All the former heads were listening. Dumbledore considered him for a long moment, his gaze never leaving Severus. And what would your plan for a 9-year-old Mr. Potter be? Severus met the question. The first step for any change is to see the world beyond these walls. It's true for me and for Harry. I propose we leave Hogwarts for a while, a journey. He would travel as my companion and begin learning in the wider world. Dumbledore's expression eased. Change can be good. Severus looked relieved. So you agree? Dumbledore smiled, then shook his head, a little indulgent. You're asking the wrong person. If you wish to take Mr. Potter on a trip, you must have the consent of the boy and of his current guardians. My opinion matters little if they do not agree. Severus inwardly resented the old man's airy manner, but he hid it. So if both Harry and his guardians consent, you will not oppose it? If both consent freely, what weight would my opposition even carry? Dumbledore said. Then I'll take that as agreement. He stood and moved for the door. I'll go to the Dursleys now. He had taken 2 steps when he turned back, reached across Dumbledore's desk, and scooped up 2 boxes of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans from the corner, as if he'd simply remembered he liked them. Then he left, beans in hand. Inside Severus's body, the watching ghost of Snape was utterly dumbfounded. Dumbledore must already have worked out you aren't me. The ghost hissed coldly from somewhere inside him. Severus walked along the dim Hogwarts corridor and shrugged. I don't think it took him very long. Then you still went. I still went to see him, yes. I still brought up Harry Potter to his face. The ghost was about to ask how Severus could be so reckless. Severus answered with a question instead. Can I promise I'll never see Dumbledore again? The ghost fell silent. The answer was obvious, and Severus kept talking as if he hadn't noticed. Of course not. Since I can't guarantee we'll never meet him again, and there's no way to stop him from discovering I've been replaced, it's better to be frank and take the initiative. We both know him. Old Dumbledore likes his riddles and vague games. If I keep my mouth shut, he might not ask what's really wrong. He'll follow my lead, test me with questions, and watch what I do. Then I can decide the rest. What if he calls you out on the spot? The ghost asked finally, incredulous at the audacity inside his own head. If he does, I'll tell the truth. Severus's voice was flat. You can see for yourself that I never intended to possess you, and Dumbledore still needs a Severus Snape to do certain things. As long as he needs that, he can't just dispose of me. He had already returned to his underground office, so going to see Dumbledore was a risk worth taking, and now he allowed a small, satisfied tilt to his mouth. It's paid off. He didn't exactly agree, but he's given ground about Potter. He wants to see how I'll persuade the boy and his guardians to let him go. He'll use that to judge what I am. The ghost concentrated on him. Then who are you, really? What are you planning to do with Potter? Severus pinched a small pinch of flue powder from the mantel and smiled faintly. Do you know which kind of person people most admire, trust, and rely upon? What? A sincere person. The memory came without warning, like a record skipping into someone else's voice. A sincere person, a sincere person. Under our family's influence and education, I always hoped you'd grow into a sincere person, Harry Potter. Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Aunt Petunia's shrill voice early that morning sounded like a struck, cracked gong. It rattled the house and made Harry's eardrums ache. "I didn't eat it," 9-year-old Harry protested, wavering between stubbornness and resignation. He pointed at Dudley, who lounged on the sofa with small squinted eyes and already the round, prosperous bulk of an overindulged child. "It was Dudley. There was cream on his mouth this morning." "It wasn't me," Dudley wailed, switching instantly into the role of idolized victim. "Of course it wasn't you, little angel. So sensible, keeping your promises." Petunia's voice smoothed to syrup when she addressed her son. The sweetness lasted less than 3 seconds. "But some people, liars, are different. My goodness, Potter, stealing food is bad enough, but to slander Dudley on top of it." Harry sagged. He lowered his head and let the customary shrug settle into his shoulders. "Fine. Say whatever you want." Vernon came in from the porch with the Post in his hand and bellowed, primly offended, "You don't talk to us in that tone. You ought to learn some gratitude." "Does washing your socks count?" Harry muttered under his breath. Vernon sniffed and then turned his attention to the letters. "They expect us to fix some drain? If they think my drills are insufficient." He began to grumble through the bills aloud. "Oh, Marge is coming the day after tomorrow. She misses Dudley." He made a face and flicked at a notice. "Another collection notice. We pay so much in council tax, and that hydrant by the pavement's been broken for months." Harry tried to cheer himself with a small plan. "Can I go to Mrs. Figg's the day after tomorrow? One of her cats is missing. If it isn't found, it might come here and—" He hurried on, desperate, ridiculous. "It might poop in the yard. Aunt Petunia could step in it. I can help find it. That'll save us all." Mrs. Figg was the eccentric neighbor whose house smelled of cabbage and cats. Compared to Uncle Vernon's house, it was almost paradise. But Vernon, having finished the letters and then discovered another wedged in the door, cut Harry off without a glance. "You're staying home all day the day after tomorrow," he called to the kitchen. "Petunia, there's a letter for you." "Who from?" "Annie?" Petunia came out, dry legal towel in hand, and as she passed Harry, she barked an order to fish the pillowcases out of the basin. Harry rose and felt hollow inside. Dudley peered at him with the malevolent delight of someone who knows he has the better of a cousin. Then, very softly, an envelope slipped from between Petunia's fingers and hit the hall floor. The sound drew their attention. Petunia's face, for a moment, showed a terror Harry had never seen. It was something like seeing Mrs. Figg's cat on your best blanket. No, worse, an alarm that made Vernon's jaw go tight. "What is it?" he demanded. For 2 seconds the house held its breath. Petunia's lips trembled as she forced out a name none of them had ever heard. "Say Severus Snape." "Who?" Vernon said, the word ragged. Petunia didn't answer. She turned as if pulled by a wire and stared straight at Harry. Harry, who had been trying to memorize the strange name out of idle curiosity, felt his glasses slip and his heart lurch. Vernon followed her gaze and his face went dark. "Those freaks," he muttered, the epithet rolling out like something the family said when anything unclean or unknown was near. Petunia hurried to the clock on the wall, eyes frantic. 3 minutes. 3 minutes left. They love doing this. This isn't a request. It's a summons. A shameless, overbearing summons. She grabbed Dudley, who began to protest so loudly he pinched her hand, and she ordered Vernon to get Harry and get to the car immediately. "Where are we going?" "I was supposed to play computer games with Dad this morning." Dudley squealed, clutching at his mother. "Sorry, baby. Plans have changed," Petunia crooned at Dudley and then to Vernon. "Anywhere but home. Let's go to the fair. Didn't you want to go again?" Vernon, as if acting on instinct, seized Harry by the collar like a man taking hold of a stray animal and steered him out the front door. The family poured into the garden as if fleeing a plague. Vernon flung Harry onto the lawn and turned to fetch the car. Petunia fussed over Dudley, who was furious and confused. The scene had the bright, frenzied absurdity of a family in flight. Then a pleasant voice floated over them from the porch in measured amusement. "This weather may not be very suitable for a family outing." The sound almost made Vernon stumble. Petunia stopped dead as if someone had petrified her. Dudley and Harry both turned to look. To the right of the Dursleys' front door, where no one could have expected anyone to be sitting, a man occupied a high-backed chair. He sat cross-legged in a manner that somehow made the chair look smaller. His hair gathered into a neat short ponytail, his nose sharp and hooked, his eyes dark and intense. He wore black robes that seemed entirely out of season, yet neat and impeccable. In one hand he held a teacup. With the other he gave a casual, elegant little wave. They had rushed out so fast they had not noticed a stranger sitting by the door. Petunia's face was a study in shock. Vernon stared with a mix of fury and fear. Severus Snape inclined his head in the smallest, most courteous of nods. He smiled once at Harry and Dudley, an expression oddly civilized on that severe face, and said, as if offering an observation, "Besides, you have a guest to entertain today." Petunia's expression was hideous, like a half-melted lump of butter. In the end, the Dursleys didn't actually shut Severus out. Not because they were polite, but because the neighbor who was trimming his lawn had seen the whole scene in the front garden. Neither Petunia nor Vernon wanted to lose face then and there. Besides, they were both quietly terrified that if they slammed the door in the stranger's face, he, one of those people, might do something alarming in public. Petunia was the first to turn back into the house, clutching Dudley to her side as if shielding him. Vernon gave Harry a push so the curious boy would follow, and Harry, too bewildered to resist, stepped inside. They offered no invitation to Severus, but he left his teacup on the chair by the gate and slipped in as if he belonged, the last in line. "Long time no see, Petunia." Petunia, sitting on the sofa with Dudley in her lap, said nothing. Of course, she knew who Severus Snape was. Every fiber of her attention narrowed to protecting Dudley. Severus seemed unfazed by her coldness. He smiled at Vernon, extended a hand with easy manners. "Mr. Vernon Dursley? First time we've met properly. I'm Severus Snape." So neat, so well-spoken, with a sunny smile, Vernon was taken aback. This didn't match the monster from his vague memories. He found himself shaking the man's hand. "My wife and I have known each other since childhood. Our families were neighbors back in Cokeworth, though, as you can probably tell, Petunia has never been fond of me." The ghost still inside Severus's body winced. The words slid out with a tone that made it sound as if Petunia had looked down on him all along. In truth, their dislike had always been mutual. If the ghost could do anything at that moment, he would have very cheerfully hexed Severus for the smug phrasing. But Vernon simply grew more flustered. "Well, Petunia, well." Severus, sensing the awkwardness, changed the subject. "I understand you work at a drilling company?" Vernon brightened. "Yes, offshore drilling. Do you know what that is?" Severus feigned surprise. "Could it be Grunnings, the biggest producer of offshore drills in England?" Vernon laughed, the sort of hearty paternal laugh that comes with relief. He reached to pat Severus on the shoulder, missed, and patted his back instead. "Our drills are well known. If someone wants to set up a rig at sea nowadays, they've little choice." "Are you a drill salesman?" "No, I run the sales division." "To reach management in a firm like that shows real talent, Vernon." The ghost snorted internally. Severus's half-truths and cultivated charm were playing Vernon like a fiddle. The ghost watched with cold amusement while the muggle basked in the attention. Vernon, however, felt he'd found a witty, well-mannered gentleman. "Where do you work, Mr. Snape?" "Call me Severus. I frittered away a few years when I was young. Now I teach, professor and dean at a vocational college." "You look so young," Vernon gushed. "Alas, I can't compete with you, brother. Happy family and a good career and all that." They traded flattery and, in a few short minutes, were already treating one another like old friends. Vernon kept gesturing toward the kitchen as if to invite Severus to a drink. Petunia didn't meet her husband's eye. She was stunned that Severus could do small talk like a real muggle. It made the brusque, bitter man she remembered from childhood feel impossibly distant. Dudley sulked and pouted. Today would mean no computer games either way, and Harry stood at the window, distracted by a different mystery. The chair the stranger had been sitting on by the gate was gone. All that remained on the path were a teacup with a few dregs of black tea and a small pebble. He swore he had looked at the chair twice before coming inside. Now it had vanished. Had someone sneaked into the yard and stolen it? Should he tell Mr. Snape? Harry hovered between curiosity and unease. Vernon and Severus, already calling each other brother in a mood of triumph, sat at the dining table. Vernon, after a couple of ineffectual nudges at Petunia to fetch a drink, got up and made 2 cups of tea himself. "This must be your son, brother. strong as a little calf. The ghost couldn't help a scornful thought. That boy was more piglet than calf, only fed on swill and luck. But the words were only heard by Severus, who continued with his smooth, hypocritical compliments. Dudley heard his name and scowled. Vernon beamed like a proud father. Dudley's always been healthy, our pride. Severus suddenly remembered something. Oh, I come bearing gifts for the children. He extended his right hand toward Dudley. It was empty. Dudley, outraged at being teased, shouted, "There's nothing in your hand." Severus smiled. Sometimes what you see isn't necessarily real, right? For a heartbeat, Petunia and Vernon froze in genuine panic. They knew who Severus Snape truly was. They craved normality and hated anything strange. For a moment, the memory of his ordinary manner almost let them forget what he was. Now, were they about to be forced to witness sorcery in their own living room? Then, with a casual motion, Severus withdrew his left hand from his robe pocket and produced 2 small boxes of sweets. Ha! But this time, what your eyes see is real. He handed one box, Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, to Dudley. Petunia and Vernon exhaled in relief. The other box he placed in Harry's hands. "And yours, Harry Potter." Saying the name made Harry go still for a moment. He hadn't yet realized that if Severus and Aunt Petunia had been childhood acquaintances, Severus must have known his mother. He hadn't forgotten the missing chair, though. Thank you, Mr. Snape, about your chair outside." "Chair? What chair?" Severus winked. "Remember what I said. What you see isn't always real." Harry didn't understand riddles. He only felt, without quite knowing why, that the man was being profound, so he nodded uncertainly. The ghost inside Severus watched Harry with a storm of conflicting emotion. Those emerald eyes, the same as in his memory, held him a second too long. The boy's face was cut from the same mold. The faint lightning-shaped scar beneath the unruly black hair made the ghost purse his lips. Vernon, pleased that Severus had come bearing gifts, beamed red-faced. "So, did you come to visit Petunia today, Severus?" Severus's smile didn't falter, but his answer chilled the room. "No, I came for your nephew, Harry Potter." 5. Harry's fate. When Severus arrived, Petunia, who had been silent from start to finish, finally shrieked. "I knew it! I knew it! People like you, never allowed near Harry. He's normal, raised in our home, absolutely normal." Vernon, who had practically been Severus's ally a moment before, looked awkward. He stood by his wife, of course, but you cannot call a man brother 1 second and sneer at him the next. Besides, Vernon had decided Snape wasn't the sort of eccentric he'd imagined. He seemed decent enough. The ghost of Severus watched with a cold smirk, noting the shameless frauds bending over backwards to ingratiate themselves. Pointless, now that fate had already decided. He suspected Dumbledore had set up an impossible test on purpose. The Dursleys were so unreasonable that getting them to release Harry willingly would take a miracle. Harry stared at Severus in bewilderment. Why would a professor, the head of a house at a school he'd never seen, come all this way for him? And why had Aunt Petunia burst out like that? What did she mean by not normal? Of everyone present, living or dead, except Dudley, who was busy tilting back a mouthful of every flavor beans, only Severus kept his composure. Petunia's outburst was precisely what he had expected. He had never believed a few polite words would win the family over. He leaned back, sipped the tea Vernon had poured, and asked calmly, "In your eyes, Mrs. Dursley, am I normal now?" Petunia's eyes bored into him, unblinking. "You know better than anyone whether you're normal. You may fool my husband, my son, but not me. I knew you as a girl. I know you." "Yet should we judge normality solely by conduct, thought, or speech?" Severus said. "Those things can be taught, altered, shaped by society. But some things simply are, or are not, regardless of will, objectively present." Petunia's chest heaved. "By your definition of normal, Harry Potter carries such an objective trait. I know you'd rather I not say it in front of the boy, but blood will out. You remember the unusual signs your sister showed even before Hogwarts," Severus went on, calm as ever. He kept the conversation from rising into a shouting match. Petunia's face darkened. Those memories were the ones she hated. The Evans household had loved and been proud of Lily's differences. Ordinary Petunia had felt overlooked, had grown jealous, and that jealousy had hardened into the present loathing of wizards and magic. Your sister was once your parents' pride. What if Harry starts showing the same traits, Here, in this house, in front of your guests, your relatives. The words struck home. Petunia paled. She remembered only too well what Lily had been like before she ever set foot in Hogwarts. If Harry followed suit, at school, at home, with or without strangers watching. Severus cut across her fantasy, abandoning the formal Mrs. Dursley and using her first name. Magic doesn't vanish because you wish it away. It will keep building inside Harry, warping. Like a water balloon squeezed to the limit, it will burst, hurting him and everyone around him. And even if he doesn't turn dark, what do you think will happen if he never learns how to live properly with ordinary people while this power sits inside him? He tapped his own eyes for emphasis. I can see glimpses of the future, things you would not want. At the zoo, he will shatter the reptile house glass and cause a panic. In this very room, his mocking aunt will inflate and bob against the ceiling. In the seaside cottage, because you refuse to let him attend that school, your precious son will sprout a pig's tail. You're threatening us, Petunia shrieked. I am stating facts, Severus replied. His gaze shifted to Vernon. Since Petunia had taken over, Vernon had mostly sat in silence, twiddling his thumbs. When he caught Severus's look, he didn't look away. Mate, Severus said quietly, I know what you're afraid of, but some problems don't go away just because you run from them. If it's going to happen anyway, we should prepare. I'll teach Harry how to live here. No trouble, no worries. What do you say? Vernon glanced at his wife, then rose and put an arm around her trembling shoulder. Shall we listen to him, mate? Severus didn't press further. He had said what needed saying. Anything more would only backfire. In the end, the decision rested with Petunia. The room fell silent. Apart from the ticking wall clock, only the sound of Dudley crunching every flavor beans could be heard. 10 seconds passed, maybe 20. At last, Petunia's hoarse voice broke the hush. How can you prove I can trust you with my sister's son? Severus answered softly. He's Lily Evans's son. The moment the words left his lips, Severus felt a deathly stare bore into him, as if something inside the woman wanted to swallow him whole. Petunia collapsed back into her chair, burst into tears, stood again, wiped her face, and walked to the door. Do whatever you want. Whatever. She snapped over her shoulder. Though she had not spoken an explicit agreement, her meaning was unmistakable. Vernon finally exhaled and relaxed into a smile, until he turned to Harry when it snapped back into a stern, flushed glare. You heard them. Go pack your... Severus raised a hand, stopping him. Then he turned to Harry, who stood bewildered, not understanding what the adults had decided about him. Mr. Harry Potter, Severus said, meeting his eyes, I've persuaded your guardians. Now I need your answer. Will you come with me for preparatory tuition, to get ready for Hogwarts, and to accept your unusual identity? Addressed so seriously, Harry felt nervous. He swallowed hard, stammered, then asked the question he most wanted to know. Mr. Snape, did you know my mother? Severus ignored the spectral Snape's glare and smiled. We were best friends. Without hesitation, Harry almost leapt off the sofa. I'd be honored, sir. Stop staring at me with those dead fish eyes. We both know looks can't kill, especially not a ghost's. While Harry packed his few things in the cupboard under the stairs, Severus stepped out into the Dursleys' yard. The sky had gone leaden, ready to break, and he let the threat of rain match the little performance he was putting on for the ghost that haunted him. The ghost's expression was murderous enough. Snape was trying to kill him with his stare, and the hatred showed in snarls that only Severus could hear. You vile fraud! How dare you speak Lily Evans' name? How dare you tell Potter you were her friend? The ghost hissed. Severus answered with deliberate indifference. Are you angry that I lied, or that the words came from your mouth? Or are you ashamed that you no longer have the right to say her name aloud? The question shut the ghost up. He did not look appeased. If he had a body, he would have ripped Severus apart, but as a shade, he could only rage in silence. Do you remember when you asked what I really wanted and how I answered? Severus went on. The ghost met him with a cold, mute stare. Severus did not bother to soften his tone. I said honest people are the only ones worth appreciating, trusting, relying on. You think the homework I did on the Grunnings drill was trickery, the ghost spat. But if Vernon Dursley found out I'd never heard of Grunnings, he wouldn't care. He'd feel closer to me. Why? Severus supplied the answer, as if to a question he had already expected. Because it's still honesty. I learned something I did not know and walked into a field I'd never touched, so our first meeting would go smoothly. Is that deceit? Seek common ground while keeping differences, he said. That's how conversation begins. Otherwise, we quarrel as soon as views clash. Muggles don't understand wizards, and wizards scorn muggles. But muggles aren't ignorant by choice. Wizards hide. Wizards feel superior by birth. That superiority is idiotic, Severus said. Especially when we must deal with them. We can't swallow our pride. He shrugged. I can. Muggles and wizards share reason and feeling. There's no biological barrier. Why treat them as inherently different? Once dialogue starts, Severus pressed, which of my words were lies? Which of them didn't take Petunia and Vernon's viewpoint into account? Isn't that honesty? You only see me as using your past with Lily to win Petunia and Harry. But think, right now I am you and you are me. The ghost was silent, and the silence felt different this time. Severus folded his arms and leaned against the outside wall of the Dursley house. From there, his rightward glance found Harry, cheerfully folding the pitiful bundle of clothes he had been allowed to take. No Dursley moved to help. The day revolved around Harry, and yet, apart from one question, he had been nearly invisible. I can be honest with the Dursleys, Severus said, and with you too, old Snape. The nickname throbbed visibly at the ghost's temples. I've thought it over. The moment you fully replaced me, you should have died. So why are you a ghost trapped in my body? How do ghosts even form? You don't want to die. You still cling to this world. Harry Potter is that anchor. At last the ghost could not hold back. What are you trying to say? Severus answered coolly. I'm saying our states are set. You are the ghost Severus Snape. I am the potions master, head of Slytherin House at Hogwarts, former Death Eater, possible future member of the Order of the Phoenix, and the Severus Snape whose hair is going to stop being greasy. He rattled the list off with mild amusement, flicking his short, fluttering ponytail without caring at the darkening look on the ghost's face. Objectively, we are the same. Subjectively, we share the same goal. Your obsession as a ghost is to protect Lily's son, Harry Potter. So is mine. Only by protecting him can I live as Severus Snape, without fear, and dare I say, enjoy life. Your protection is driven by atonement, with no thought for your own end. I want a future that's better. That isn't opposition, it's improvement. But is your way truly better? The ghost's voice hollowed. I know what you're planning. Taking Potter out of the Dursleys early, you intend to bond with him, to make him forget that one of the men who destroyed his family was you. When the truth comes out, that betrayal will only make him hate you more, and you'll be ruining Albus Dumbledore's plans. He will return. He will expect you to keep hating Potter, to keep his trust, not to go dashing about doing him favors. Severus gave no defensive flair. He spoke calmly. As for Dumbledore's plan, you needn't be so anxious. He has thought things through far more thoroughly than you imagine. One reason he may have let me try to take Harry away now is that Harry is only 9. He will not show magical talent, not be called to Hogwarts for another 2 years. Out here, with me keeping a low profile, he won't attract attention. If I fail to make any surprises in those 2 years, Dumbledore can steer things back to the original track when Harry starts school. I can make room for that. As for your claim that I'm Potter's enemy, Severus raised an eyebrow and sighed. Very well. Since I said we are one and the same, I cannot take only the benefits and refuse the burdens. Suppose I was one of the chief culprits in the Potter's deaths. If I hide the truth and act as Lily's closest friend, then the day he learns will certainly feel like betrayal. But remember what I said before I came here, about the kind of person most worthy of appreciation, trust, and reliance? The ghost froze at the words. Dread rose in him like a tide. Through the window, Severus could see Harry shoulder the old suitcase Vernon had thrown out years ago, grin on his face as he struggled down the path, unassisted. Severus murmured, "Honesty, absolute honesty." "How much mess do you intend to make?" the ghost demanded, his voice trembling. "I have been truthful with Vernon, with Petunia, with you. Why should I lie to or keep secrets from Harry Potter?" Severus smoothed his robe, which was neither wrinkled nor dusty, and stood upright. "Just because he's a child, I don't think that's reason enough. He did not look back as he stepped off the path toward the boy emerging from the house. 7. Blood feud. Harry had never felt better. Carrying his suitcase, he walked out of the Dursley house alone and in silence, without a single farewell. The air tasted sweeter, and the gloomy sky felt invigorating. Though he and the mysterious Mr. Snape had exchanged only a few words, the way the man had treated the Dursleys made Harry certain he was a decent person, especially since Aunt Petunia had confirmed he had once been his mother's best friend. As Harry stood in the yard, glancing around, Severus appeared at his side like a bat gliding low in the dusk. Harry hadn't noticed him arrive. "Mr. Snape, where are we going now?" he asked before he realized he was speaking. Severus looked up at the overcast sky, picked a teacup up off the ground, and once he was sure they were alone, tossed it into the air. He tapped the falling cup lightly with a small wooden stick. Harry blinked and swore. He hadn't even seen the movement. The delicate teacup twisted and stretched as it fell, reshaping itself like putty. When it landed in Harry's hands, it had become a black umbrella. Harry stood frozen, dumbfounded. Behind them, a Venetian blind in the Dursleys' window slammed down with an angry, forceful sound. Severus, who had caused it all, waved casually toward the rooftop, as if no one else were there. An owl that had apparently been hiding on the roof poked its head out. At Severus's wave, it leapt, flew past Harry with a showy somersault, and landed on Severus's shoulder. Severus glanced at the dramatic Hogwarts owl, pulled a blank piece of parchment from his pocket, tapped it with his wand, and an elegant line of cursive script appeared. He rolled the parchment into a tube and the owl snapped it up, raised a wing as if saluting, and flew away into the clouds. Rain began to fall in fine threads. Severus patted Harry, breaking his stupor as if waking someone from a petrifying spell. "Don't just stand there like a fool. Open the umbrella and follow me." He produced a black umbrella from who knew where, opened it, and strode out of the Dursleys' yard. Harry's mind was mush. He didn't remember opening his own umbrella, and his feet moved mechanically to follow Severus. Only when they reached Privet Drive did he stammer a question. "Mr. S. Snape, you just... Do you think that was a trick?" Severus asked without turning around. I think a trick shouldn't be able to do that much." "Then you're not like those people who deceive themselves, even when the evidence is right in front of them. That's a good quality." Harry's confused mind recalled the bits Severus had said to Petunia and Vernon, things he hadn't understood before. His eyes widened, and he hurried to catch up. "You're a wizard." It was July, the height of summer, when British weather could change in a heartbeat. A drizzle had become a downpour, rain hammered on the umbrellas and pedestrians without cover scattered, running for shop doorways. Severus kept walking, not denying the statement. "Of course I am a wizard. But you told Uncle Vernon you were a professor and dean at a vocational school." "Isn't a school of magic a vocational school?" Severus said, as if puzzled. "You said the name back at the house? Hogwarts, right?" Harry, excited, didn't notice his foot splash through a puddle. Severus sidestepped in distaste. "Yes, Hogwarts, the only school of magic in Britain." "So you're taking me to Hogwarts? Can I learn magic? Can I become a wizard?" "Only children who are 11 and who have shown magical characteristics are admitted." Severus tapped Harry's mud-splattered shoes and pant legs with his wand and used a scouring charm. Magic made looking after a troublesome child far easier. "Are you 11 yet?" Harry shook his head. "Have you shown any magical characteristics?" He remembered odd incidents now and then, but Aunt Petunia and Uncle Vernon had always told him they were nothing. He lowered his head, feeling low. Then Severus changed the tone. "You will turn 11, and you will eventually show the magical traits of a wizard." Hearing that, Harry looked up, grabbed Severus's black robe, splashing rain into his face. "So I can learn magic? Is it true, Mr. Snape?" Severus stopped. He sighed, took a handkerchief from his pocket, wiped rain from his face, and looked around. They had left Privet Drive and now walked a narrow, deserted alley where water ran off the roofs into the gutters. Rain pelted down. Severus put a hand on Harry's shoulder and spoke seriously. "You can learn magic, and you can become a wizard. In fact, your name is already written in the history of magic." Harry was unnerved by the solemnity. "Me? Am I really that important? All of this is because of your parents, especially your mother." Inside Severus, something, Ghost Snape, clenched its fists uncontrollably. Severus bowed his head so Harry couldn't see any change in expression, but his heaving chest betrayed how strongly he reacted. Harry froze for the second time. The suitcase slipped from his hand and thudded to the ground. The noise scared a stray cat under the eaves. Paws scrambled. After a few seconds, Harry stared at Severus. Aunt Petunia, she said they died in a car accident. They were both wizards, graduates of Hogwarts. They did not die of disease, and they did not die in a car accident. They died at the hands of a dark lord, a fiend who once nearly ruled English wizardkind and spread evil across Europe. The umbrella in Harry's other hand fell unnoticed. Rain soaked him through. "Shut up!" The low, suppressed voice came from inside Severus, from Ghost Snape, his face still bowed beneath greasy hair. Severus ignored the voice and met Harry's eyes in the rain. "I was your mother's friend once, yes, but we stopped speaking during our time at Hogwarts." "Shut up!" The roar echoed only in Severus's ears. "Not only that," Severus went on, "your father and I hated each other. He and his friends nearly killed me back then. I wished I could have killed them." "Why are you saying this? What right do you have to speak in my name?" Harry cried, though he could not hear the ghost. To Harry, Severus, who had once earned his gratitude, suddenly seemed like a terrifying figure. Under the black umbrella, the robe swallowed him in shadow. Joy, excitement, hope all vanished. Harry backed into a wall and slipped to the wet ground, shaking from cold or fear. He pushed himself up with his hands and continued to scramble backward, desperate to get away. But another voice, calm and distinct, spoke as clearly as if it were in the open. "And I was once a capable subordinate of the Dark Lord who killed your parents and one of the accomplices who indirectly caused their deaths. You and I share a deep-seated hatred for the murder of your mother and father. Do you understand, Harry Potter? 8. Choice, what right do you have to tell him those things? This is none of his business. What do these matters have to do with you? You despicable thief, you shameless bandit." The roars echoed inside him, Ghost Snape raging, but Severus seemed to have muted that inner voice. His face did not change. He stood motionless, watching Harry retreat through the heavy rain. The boy, soaked to the skin, scrambled back to his feet. He stared at Severus in terror, then turned and began to run, abandoning even the suitcase on the ground. There was no trace of the relief he had felt when he left the Dursleys. His whole body trembled. All he wanted now was to get away, out of the alley, into the storm, away from this man. But before Harry could take 2 steps, Severus's voice, low and steady, reached him as if it came from the depths of the boy's chest. "I begged that Dark Lord to spare your mother. He promised me. And he meant to. But your mother chose to stand in front of you. She died for you. Lily feared nothing for your sake. And now, having only just met one of your enemies, you run away?" At those words, Harry stopped. He panted, rain sliding off his hair onto his cheeks. His glasses were spattered and blurred. Beyond them, the dark figure at the end of the alley was only a silhouette. The sky had gone the color of dusk, and the streetlights stayed stubbornly unlit, whether from neglect or some other reason. "Are you going to take that Dark Lord's place and kill me?" Harry shouted, hatred lacing the question. Inside Severus, it was a noisy confusion, the inner snark mocking him, Ghost Snape's furious cries. You'd think a few provocative words would tip the boy over, the snark thought gleefully. If I'd come to kill him, he'd be dead by now. Severus, however, did not rise to it. He remained where he stood under the black umbrella. The wind whipped his short ponytail. The air smelled of wet earth. He said quietly, "Kill you? If I had truly wanted you dead, I could have done it at your aunt's house. There was no reason to bring you here." Harry took his glasses off and sank to the ground as if a stone weighed his chest. His nose stung. Something warm mixed with the rain ran down his face. He could not tell whether he was crying or whether the ache was grief for parents he barely remembered, the suppression of 8 years under the Dursleys, or anger at this man who called himself his enemy. The black figure stepped closer. The umbrella lifted and sheltered Harry. The cold drops were kept at bay. "You are her son," Severus said. "It was the protection she wove into you that killed that Dark Lord. You are the savior of the magical world, a hero in the eyes of wizards. And yet you live in that tiny cupboard, crawling with spiders, enduring your aunt's scorn and abuse. She was the one who opened my eyes, he continued, voice steady. I have wronged her, only her. If I wish to make amends for a sin no one has the right to forgive, I can only do so through you. Harry looked up, astonished, and met Severus's eyes, eyes that, unbearably, were like his mother's. Ghost Snape fell silent, as if cut off. You know nothing of that world, Harry Potter. You know nothing of your enemies. You could wait until you are 11, until the owl brings your acceptance letter to Hogwarts, to learn about it all. Severus drew his wand and tapped the boy's taped glasses, the frames mended at once. A casual flick, and Harry, drenched and filthy a moment before, was suddenly clean and dry, as if he had stepped out of a story. The wonder of magic unfolded before the 9-year-old. Severus extended a hand. Come with me. I will be your teacher until you enter Hogwarts. I will take you ahead of time to see that colorful world and meet its people. I will teach you everything I know, potions, charms, transfiguration, even the dark arts. And if one day you grow into a savior worthy of the name, point your wand at me. Use everything I have taught you, give it your all, and kill me. He held out his hand. Do you have the courage, son of Lily Evans and James Potter? Harry Potter? Harry Potter wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, jaw set. He stared at Severus for a long beat, then seized the outstretched hand and let it haul him to his feet. I'll go with you, he said. A small, almost invisible smile crossed Severus's face. With a flick, he sent the black umbrella sailing back into Harry's hand. A wise choice. He turned and strode toward Surrey Station. From now on, don't call me Mr. Snape. Call me Teacher. Harry gripped the umbrella, took a shuddering breath, and hurried to keep up. The taller and smaller figures receded into the curtain of rain, the wind howling around them. When they had gone, something shifted in the alley. The dark street lamps, which had been stubbornly dead, sprang to life one by one. A tabby cat slunk out from the shadow where it had been sheltering. Beside it stood an old man with a white beard and half-moon spectacles, Albus Dumbledore. The tabby blurred, and in its place appeared an elderly witch with her hair in a tight bun and robes of deep green, Minerva McGonagall, Transfiguration professor and head of Gryffindor. I don't understand why you stopped him, Dumbledore, McGonagall snapped. He's still too young. He shouldn't know these things yet. 9. Fame. Dumbledore did not answer McGonagall at once. He stared toward the spot where Severus and Harry had disappeared into the rain, and for a long while he said nothing. At last he spoke. We do, of course, have to take age into account and consider the feelings of children, he said. But there are cases, rare ones, where that rule does not apply. Harry Potter is an exceptional child. After everything he has been through, his future will be unlike any other. So perhaps it isn't such a terrible thing for him to learn some things a little earlier. McGonagall's face stayed hard. But Snape, surely you noticed before I did, something is wrong with him. These are not things he would do or words he would say. We do not know who he is now, or where the Snape we once knew has gone, she added. Handing Harry to him like this is far too risky. Sometimes uncertainty is preferable to certainty, Dumbledore replied. His blue eyes were very deep. McGonagall could not tell what he had decided. As for who Severus Snape has become and what his intentions are, didn't we just see what he meant to do? McGonagall shook her head. That's only his side of the story. Exactly, when we would know a person truly, we ought to look less at what he says and more at what he does. He paused, then raised his right hand. From a distant rooftop in the curtain of rain, a soaked owl flew and circled once before settling on Dumbledore's arm. The bird was bedraggled, but the parchment in its talons was well protected. Dumbledore opened the letter. Severus's report sent after taking Harry from the Dursleys. It was all business. He had obtained permission from Harry's guardian and the boy himself to take him away, and he formally requested a lengthy leave of absence. At the very least, he would not be able to resume his duties as Potions Master and Dean of Slytherin when Hogwarts opened in September, and Dumbledore might wish to appoint someone more capable. The note left little to criticize. A quill appeared in Dumbledore's hand. He shook the parchment lightly, and the words Severus had written blurred away as if brushed off. The magical world has been rather peaceful these past years, though not without its small incidents. The sweets-loving headmaster muttered to himself. The quill danced across the paper, Rain avoiding the surface as he wrote a reply to the Dean of Slytherin, who had spirited away the savior of the wizarding world and announced he intended to be absent. The reply was short. When it was finished, Dumbledore tucked it into the owl's grasp. The bird saluted with a wing and flew off into the rain under the watchful eyes of Dumbledore and McGonagall. London. Charing Cross Road. The street, usually busy, was thin with people under the heavy rain. Two black umbrellas, one large and one small, came to the curb. Under a shop awning, three oddly dressed men, dressed much like Severus in robes and odd haircuts, were talking. They had been laughing, but when they saw Severus and the boy approaching, their smiles vanished. One of them stared for a long beat, then nudged his companions with an elbow. "Professor Snape." They lowered their heads and greeted him. Severus turned. Those faces were not unfamiliar. They were recent Hogwarts graduates. "Brown, Guerrero, Smith," he said. "Now that you've left school, you needn't call me Professor." His tone was almost friendly, and the three men were stunned for a moment. This hardly seemed the Snape they remembered. Then one of them recovered. "You taught us for 7 years," he said. "No matter what, you'll always be our professor." The well-dressed young man spoke with genuine respect. The other two nodded. Privately, they resented it. Brown-nosing, they thought. But they kept up the show. Severus waved them off and turned his shoulder, motioning for Harry to follow. They stepped into the middle of the street and through the doorway of the shabby pub that only wizards could see, the Leaky Cauldron. The three graduates watched Harry as he followed Severus, glancing at one another with thin curiosity. They wanted to ask about the boy, but Severus carried an authority none of them dared challenge. Harry had taken off his large glasses at Severus's instruction, been fitted with contact lenses, and had his lightning bolt scar concealed by a small bit of legerdemain. He was still absorbing what had just happened, only now beginning to understand the weight of being Dean of Slytherin at Hogwarts. Hogwarts, the only school of witchcraft and wizardry in Britain, had educated generations of witches and wizards. Its professors and deans shaped the magical community for years, even decades. And his teacher, his enemy, clearly had a reputation that reached far beyond the castle. Inside the Leaky Cauldron, a different world was waiting. The pub's exterior looked run down, but within it bustled with life. Wizards and witches filled almost every table, some in plain robes, some in extravagant garments, a few even wearing pointed hats. Conversations swirled around topics that would sound like fantasy to muggles: charms and ancient potions, divination and alchemy, unicorns and dragons. Someone was bartering for a potion said to regrow bone. Two men were arguing loudly about the finer points of werewolf lore. A woman by the corner table peered into a crystal ball, muttering about flickering visions. To a muggle, it would have seemed like a gathering of eccentrics. The moment Harry stepped over the threshold, heads turned. The pub's boisterous hum dipped a notch. Some tipped their hats toward Severus. Some pretended not to notice, looking away. A few jumped up and hurried out as if mice had seen a cat. The proprietor, a scruffy, square-faced man behind the bar, put down the glass he was polishing and came forward. "Professor Snape," he exclaimed, delighted. "You're here. Your new hairstyle suits you. Welcome, welcome. What can I get you?" Harry felt his chest tighten. He was astonished. His teacher was famous not just at Hogwarts, but through the magical community. He felt the weight of that fame keenly, and the feeling was heavy. The man everyone greeted as Professor Snape was also the man Harry had been taught to fear. At that moment, Severus certainly wasn't listening to what Harry was thinking, muttering inwardly to the ghost of his past, how universally loathed he had become in the magical world. He picked up the conversation with Old Tom, the landlord of the Leaky Cauldron. "I'm very pleased with my new hairstyle. First, a room with 2 beds. We'll be staying the night. As for drinks, 2 apple juices, 2 ham sandwiches, double stuffed, 2 bowls of creamy clam chowder. And Dudley, would you like dessert?" Harry, already told by Severus on the train that from now on he was to be called Dudley Dursley, took a second to realize the question was meant for him. Before he could string a nervous sentence together, Severus answered for him. "Dessert will be 2 blueberry cakes, small portions, mind you. We don't have that big an appetite." Old Tom scribbled the order. then glanced up in surprise at the man who looked so unlike his usual self, yet remained unmistakably Professor Snape, head of Slytherin. Severus Snape rarely left Hogwarts, but he was no recluse. Potions needed ingredients, and Diagon Alley and the Leaky Cauldron were frequent stops. He'd never stayed the night here before, and never had he ordered apple juice instead of fire whiskey. His tone today was almost pleasant. Tom's eyes flicked to Harry. This boy called Dudley looked far too young for Hogwarts. After a quick sidelong look, Tom handed Severus a key. Second floor, far right, third door from the end. Shall I send the food and drinks up? That would be appreciated. Severus caught the key, turned toward the stairs, and Harry hurried after him, nerves taut. As they disappeared up the stairwell, the pub fell momentarily silent, then burst into louder gossip than before. Merlin's beard. Was that Severus Snape? When did he learn to comb his hair? That isn't the point. Did you hear? Apple juice and blueberry cake. Can you imagine Snape with those? Could be an imposter. What's that potion again? My potions marks were awful. Polyjuice potion. Impossible. Who'd dare impersonate Snape? One day someone'll slip him a toad stew. Who's the kid with him? Hogwarts hasn't anyone that young. Looks 9 at most. No idea. Can't place him. Even the loosest-mouthed drunk didn't dare speculate much farther. Spreading rumors about Snape was dangerous. He was a hard case, far more than just the head of Slytherin. Many remembered that Severus Snape had been the Dark Lord's staunchest lieutenant, a top Death Eater. After you-know-who's fall, Snape had escaped punishment and been taken into Dumbledore's fold as professor and head of house, a man with one foot in two worlds, black and white. Whispering about him upstairs was tantamount to yanking a tiger's tail. Upstairs, Severus was still arguing with the ghost of his own past, or the memory he called Ghost Snape. Look at them, he muttered. Your popularity's stellar. Those tables by the window looked like they were going to spit out their drinks when they saw you. The memory sneered. Those troll-brained oafs? Nordic wizards who tried to buy rare potions from me 6 months back. Their galleons turned out to be leprechaun gold. 10 years ago, I'd have killed them myself. And now? You let them off? Severus raised an eyebrow. I have Hogwarts' reputation to consider, the memory said airily. They begged me not to summon the Aurors, so each chopped off his little and ring fingers. I kept the ring fingers for ingredients. The little fingers they took to St. Mungo's to be reattached. As he spoke, Severus dredged the episode from memory. The image of that crowd, howling and sobbing as they hacked off fingers, made his skin crawl. The deeper he reached into those years, when he'd followed Voldemort, the more blood-soaked and brutal the images became, when he had been a villain in the truest sense, utterly irredeemable. He often preferred not to recall it, yet the memories bled forward, reminders that while Hogwarts could be a sanctuary for young witches and wizards, the magical world beyond its walls was no such haven. He, Severus Snape, had once been one of the evils that shattered that sanctuary. A moment later, Tom arrived with their lunch, the tray balanced alongside that day's daily profit. Severus picked up the paper and, biting into a double-stuffed ham sandwich, studied the moving photograph of the witch who had served nearly 10 years as Minister for Magic, smiling and blinking for the camera. Harry had been in a daze since morning. Severus's revelations had shaken him. Yet seeing a moving picture for the first time, sipping his apple juice, he couldn't help feeling a small, delighted flutter. Those tiresome reporters have given another exclusive to Millicent Bagnold, Severus said. A minister whose most famous remark concerns you, Harry. Harry blinked. Me? The night the Dark Lord fell, witches and wizards across Britain celebrated without restraint. Much of it violated the International Statute of Secrecy. As minister, she had to face the International Confederation of Wizards. Severus explained, as if to a child. She acquitted herself brilliantly. Her line, "I assert our inalienable right to party," still brings cheers. But she's been minister 9 years. She'll retire next year. Lately, the prophet interviews her daily, hoping she'll tip them off about her successor. Severus's voice was casual, but Harry's mood sagged. He was thinking of his parents. Noticing the change, Severus flipped the paper over and, feigning indifference, changed the subject. Peaceful times in the magical world, only trifles make the front page. The famous best-selling author Gilderoy Lockhart has released a new book, stirring excitement among witches everywhere. A tip claims a dozen werewolves may be forming a pack in Wales. The ministry asks local wizards to report any leads. An Irish Quidditch team lost control of a golden snitch during practice. Muggles spotted a winged golden ball, so obliviators had to step in. Oh, and a serious item. The ministry received reports that a wizard may be poisoning Muggles with potions. Aurors are investigating thoroughly. They were paltry scraps. Harry listened half-heartedly, then ventured, "Sir, what are we here for?" Severus drained his bowl of clam chowder, glanced at the clock, and replied, "Behind this pub lies Britain's largest wizarding shopping street, Diagon Alley. You'll find everything there, and Gringotts, the goblin-run bank. We'll need money for the journey. At dusk, we'll visit the bank and pick up your essentials." Having recovered somewhat from the morning's revelations, Harry asked cautiously, "Why not go right after lunch?" Severus looked out the window. Through the thinning rain, a dark dot sped toward them. Moments later, a melodramatic owl swooped onto the sill, preening like Magellan returning from his voyage, and tapped imperiously on the glass. "Because we're waiting for news," Severus said. He rose, opened the window, and admitted the bird. "News from whom?" Harry asked. "From the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore." Severus retrieved the letter from the owl's leg and read it quietly. Severus took Dumbledore's reply from the owl's claws. Without pausing, he handed the bird to Harry to be fed and opened the letter. In little more than 10 seconds he had read it. An expression of "as I thought" settled over his face. The other voice in his head, the ghost of Snape, sharp and sarcastic, read it with him, a sneer curling at the corners of his mind. "I told you you wouldn't be able to take Potter away so easily." Severus only grunted in answer. "Don't gloat. We agreed. We're one now. My failure won't do you any good." The ghost gave a cold snort. "So what do you intend to do now?" Severus flicked the letter between his fingers. "What else? Dumbledore's laid out a path. We follow it." "Follow him? Do you realize whom he's asking you to find and what sort of temperament they have?" "In my memories, he was a very kind old man. He did me great favors when I was at school," Severus said lightly. That only drew more taunting from the other voice. "That's because you dazzled him with talent. He prefers that sort of thing. He'll never agree to take your place." Severus sighed. "I have to try." The ghost sneered, stubborn. "It's a waste of time." Severus shook his head. "You know nothing of the old fool. When it comes to understanding him, I know more than you do. If he truly meant to forbid me from leaving Hogwarts, he wouldn't have written in riddles. The fact he asked means there's a chance." The ghost fell silent. He would watch Severus stumble and enjoy it. Severus didn't care. He had already collected Harry. How far matters went would be determined by fate and Dumbledore's arrangements. He slid the letter away, waved his wand, and the black robes on the rack flew up and settled around him. "Come, Harry, we're going to Diagon Alley to buy some things." Harry, who had been folding clothes into a trunk, scrambled to his feet and followed. Only a few customers remained in the leaky cauldron as they passed through to the little walled courtyard at the back. Among the weeds at the edge stood a rubbish bin and the familiar brick. 3 up, 2 across. Severus tapped it 3 times. It quivered and began to move. A small hole opened, widening into a broad archway that led onto a winding, cobbled street. Diagon Alley peered back at them, bustling despite the light rain. Harry walked the rain-slick stones, eyes wide, taking in the shops on either side. Severus opened a black umbrella and, worried Harry might wander off, took his arm and steered him toward the snowy white tower of Gringotts. Summer meant families were out to buy school supplies. Students in uniforms darted past with wands tucked in pockets, laughing and jostling. Harry watched them with a hunger, Severus noticed. "If you don't want to come into the bank with me," Severus said, "I can introduce you to some new friends." Harry opened his mouth, unsure what to say. That Severus had noticed made his feelings tangle. Severus scanned the crowd and, as if on cue, picked out a mop of red hair. Percy Weasley," he called. Percy Weasley, meticulously turned out even in summer, had been trying to distance himself from his twin brother's mischief. He looked up at the voice and found Professor Snape's figure. His eyes widened. Professor Snape in these clothes. But habit won out. He waved and hurried across to the Gringotts gate. The twins, George and Fred, trailing behind, exchanged a look and grinned. "Anyone who makes Percy behave like that must be a professor," George said, and Fred added with a wink, "Let's stick to Percy. We can find out how the new students are being sorted." They fell in behind Percy, like loyal shadows. Severus patted Harry's shoulder and murmured, "Remember your identity. Dudley Dursley. Don't be nervous." Harry nodded and tried to steady his breath. Suddenly, his pocket felt heavier, and there was a faint clink. He reached inside and found a handful of silver sickles, about a dozen of them, warm from whatever charm Severus had used. He stood dazed. "Take them," Severus said. "Buy your new friends some snacks. Be generous when you make friends." Harry's eyes stung. At the Dursleys, he had never had anything of his own. Even pocket money was unheard of. Reason told him the man beside him was his enemy, but something else, gratitude, surprise, made his throat tight. He bowed his head, sniffed, and forced his voice steady. "Thank you, Professor." Severus, seeing only that Harry's head was bowed, thought the boy embarrassed and added with a dry humor, "Don't fear spending. I am a potions master. Money is not among my deficiencies." Before more could be said, Percy had reached them. "Good afternoon, Professor Snape. It's good to see you." "Good afternoon, Mr. Weasley. Are you here with your two younger brothers?" Severus's eyes flicked to George and Fred, who peered shyly from behind Percy. Percy harumphed, pushing them back in mild annoyance, and then answered with military precision. "We came to buy some magical cleaner. Mother asked me to get one, and I needed a new quill. George and Fred insisted on coming along." Fred raised his voice, teasing, "If you only needed a quill, why were you admiring yourself in the mirror for so long before you left? And why are you wearing your uniform?" George winked. "Who finished buying their quill ages ago and then wandered Diagon Alley in their uniform instead of finding Mum?" Percy flushed with embarrassment and anger. Severus, watching him carefully, offered the sort of praise Percy was unused to getting. "Your uniform is very neat, Mr. Weasley. The lion embroidery on your shoulder. Is that your mother's work?" Percy went beet red and straightened as if on parade. "Yes, Professor." Severus's voice softened in a way that made Harry shift uncomfortably. "Although you are not a Slytherin, you are an excellent student. I often mention you to Dudley. I tell him to look to you as an example." At that, Severus gave Harry a gentle push forward. Harry felt tongue-tied, but forced himself to meet the three Weasleys' eyes. "This is my friend's son, Dudley Dursley. He's not old enough for Hogwarts yet, but he's always wanted to see the school. Would you take him around Diagon Alley with your brothers? I'll come back for him in 40 minutes. Percy did not hesitate. "It would be my honor, Professor Snape." 12. Aurore. Just when Severus thought things had finally calmed down after he handed Harry over to Percy, the Weasley twins, George and Fred, who had been lurking behind their elder brother, suddenly shouted, loud enough to draw everyone's attention. "Professor Snape? Are you the Severus Snape, who's head of Slytherin at Hogwarts?" Percy, who had already fixed his attention on Harry, went pale. He shot his younger brothers a furious glare, trying desperately to shut them up. The twins simply dodged his hands and continued unbothered. Severus didn't dodge the question either. He regarded them with mild interest. "Yes, I am Severus Snape." George's eyes danced with curiosity. "But you don't look at all like how Bill, Charlie, and Percy described you at home." Severus's interest sharpened. "Oh, and what did they say about me?" Percy made a frantic grab for their mouths, mortified, but George and Fred only grew louder. "Bill says you've never seen a hairbrush. Charlie says you've only got one robe in your entire wardrobe. Percy told Mum you're biased and cruel, always docking Gryffindors and rewarding Slytherins." Percy wished the ground would swallow him. Harry gaped, bouncing his gaze between the twins and Severus. The old, sour expression that often haunted Severus's face had already been darkened by his earlier crack about only having money to his name. Now it grew even harder. If that Severus could have spoken then, he would have been ready to dock Gryffindor 200 points on the spot. Severus, however, burst into laughter, an honest, unexpected sound, especially amused by the look on that older self's face. "Ha! Exactly! They're right. From the point of view of most students, that's precisely the sort of person I ought to be." George and Fred exchanged surprised looks, taken aback by the warmth of his laughter. Fred rubbed his hands together eagerly. But if you're really like they say, shouldn't you be insulted to hear all that? Insulted? Severus echoed. He was half answering Fred and half teasing the ghost of his former self. Then, more plainly, if I were still the man I once was, yes, I'd be offended and furious. But people change. Something pushed me to face my old flaws. When I can accept that imperfect version of myself, hearing others mock it no longer wounds me. It amuses me. He patted a red-faced Percy on the shoulder. So you needn't be embarrassed, Percy. Your opinion wasn't entirely wrong. The one who ought to feel ashamed isn't you. Percy couldn't meet his eyes again. George and Fred, on the other hand, were delighted. This supposed fearsome head of Slytherin now seemed unexpectedly interesting. Fred seized the moment. Professor Snape, we're starting at Hogwarts this year too, but Mum and Dad won't tell us what the sorting ceremony is actually like. Could you tell us? Severus finally understood why they'd been pestering Percy. He considered the two eager faces. Perhaps I do know a little insider information about this year's sorting. Their anticipation flared, but Severus changed his tone. Help me look after Dudley for a while. If he enjoys himself in Diagon Alley later, I may, reluctantly, reveal something. Before he finished the sentence, George and Fred had already slung their arms around Harry's shoulders, grinning and thumping their chests as if pledging a solemn oath. You've found the right people. Percy's terrible with kids. Ron doesn't even like him, Fred said, nodding to Percy. He should be with us. Leave Dudley to us, Professor. They shepherded the bewildered Harry down the steps of Gringotts, Percy following in their wake after a quick, embarrassed bow to Severus. Severus watched them go with a small smile, then turned toward the bank. As a well-known figure in the magical community and a significant client of Gringotts, the goblins didn't neglect him. A goblin quietly appeared and led him to his private vault. Severus had not lied to Harry. How could a master of potions be poor in a world that valued rare ingredients and careful brewing? He took in the rows of vials, jars of ingredients, and peculiar alchemical items with a critical eye, then tucked 2 handfuls of galleons into his robe pockets. He idly picked up a glass orb that resembled the pensieve in Dumbledore's office, an object for storing memories, though clearly of far less capacity. The orb, and others like it, stirred a recollection. He realized these trinkets had rarely been crafted by wealthy collectors. Instead, many were family heirlooms exchanged by desperate families for a vial of potion or a rare ingredient. They had traded their pasts for immediate needs. He was intrigued by the alchemical relics, but he did not linger. With enough coin, he retraced his steps to the lobby. Before he reached it, 2 aurors in ministry uniforms, who had clearly been waiting, stepped forward. One was tall, bald, and dark-skinned, Kingsley Shacklebolt. Kingsley was the first to speak, offering a hand. We tracked you from Hogwarts to the Leaky Cauldron and then here. Professor Snape, it's been a long time. Severus, somewhat surprised, took the offered hand. Indeed, since that trial 8 years ago, it's rare an auror seeks me out. Kingsley grew serious at once. Sorry to intrude, but we need your cooperation on a case. Have you seen today's paper? Specifically the report about the potion poisoning incident? 13. Potent Hellfire Soup. Is this for us? Harry, you're so generous. Percy, he never treats us to anything. Whenever he has money, he spends it on himself. Shut up. After leaving the gates of Gringotts with the 3 Weasley brothers, Harry had taken the initiative to treat them to ice cream at a shop down the street. When the twins praised him, he admitted, a little embarrassed, "This is the money my teacher gave me." At the word teacher, Percy turned to him with a puzzled look. I've never heard of Professor Snape having any younger relatives. Everyone says he's always been unmarried, even the Slytherins. Harry felt a little guilty at the question, but before he could stammer an explanation, George and Fred jumped in for him. Does a Hogwarts professor have to tell the students whether he has younger relatives? They chorused. I always thought you'd be satisfied with being head boy, Percy, Fred added. I never imagined you'd want to be headmaster. The twins spoke together, drawing Percy's attention away, and Percy threatened loudly that he was going to tell their mother about everything they'd done today. Harry didn't mind the noise. He enjoyed the conversation. Is everyone in your family magical? He asked. Our parents are both wizards. Bill's already graduated. Charlie and Percy are still at Hogwarts. Fred and I are starting this year. We've got Ron, who's the same age as you, and Ginny, a year younger. Barring any surprises, our whole family's magical, George answered. Fred, of course, contradicted him. It's not certain for Ron and Ginny yet. Maybe one of them will be a squib. Don't say that at home. If you make one of them cry, Mum will give you a proper telling off, George warned. Ha! I'd take a telling off over seeing Ron or Ginny cry any day. True. Harry looked at them with a touch of envy. He couldn't imagine having so many siblings. Fred turned to him. What about you, Harry? Is everyone in your family a wizard? My parents probably were, Harry said cautiously, but they died when I was very young. Before my teacher took me in, I lived with relatives. They're all muggles. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Fred blurted. Harry waved him off. After what he'd been through that morning, he wasn't so easily shaken. It's all right. There's no need to be sorry. George, having shoveled the last bite of ice cream into his mouth, threw an arm around Harry's shoulders. Come to our house. Ron'll like you. He always complains Ginny's too little and moans 'cause we don't take him with us. Come on, don't stay here. Gamble and Japes shouldn't be closed yet. Harry, you've got to come check it out. Loads of brilliant stuff in there. I think Professor Snape would prefer if we took Harry to Flourish and Blots, Percy said stiffly. Go if you want. I don't understand how you can be interested in those dreadfully boring books, George snapped. Come on, Harry, Fred urged. The twins grabbed Harry's arms, one on each side, and marched off down Diagon Alley without so much as a glance at Percy. Startled, Harry stumbled and nearly fell. He banged his forehead against someone. Sorry, I'm so sorry, sir, he blurted, steadying himself and looking up. He'd collided with a very tall, thin young man whose skin was so pale it was almost colorless. The man looked more startled than Harry did. When Harry apologized, he waved his hands in a flustered way and hurried off. Watching his retreating back, Harry felt a strange flicker of recognition. He'd seen this man before in the leaky cauldron. But George and Fred were already pulling him along, and with Percy's reluctance in tow, Harry let the thought go as they followed the twins' quick pace. A potion poisoning? Across Diagon Alley, Severus rubbed his chin, recalling the morning's edition of the Daily Prophet. Yes, I did read about such a case. Kingsley glanced around the bank's ornate interior, then patted Severus on the shoulder to signal they'd better find a private place to talk. The three of them soon made their way into a VIP reception room in Gringotts. Severus had personally dealt with a group of snooty goblins to secure the room, an efficiency that surprised Kingsley. He had not thought Severus Snape so amenable. But the case was serious, and there was no time for small talk. If it were a run-of-the-mill poisoning, it might not be so troublesome, Kingsley began. But this involves Muggle high society. The victim's family has status. Her father is a Muggle duke. The Muggle Prime Minister has personally contacted Minister Bagnold, demanding answers. Severus listened with the same composed attention he always wore. When Kingsley finished, he raised an eyebrow. Then, why have you come to me? Do you suspect me? No, Professor Snape, Kingsley hurriedly denied. We never suspected you. Headmaster Dumbledore can vouch that you have not left Hogwarts since the start of the summer, until today. You are not under suspicion. Severus looked at him coolly. Kingsley leaned forward. Are you familiar with the Draught of Living Death? Severus let out a short laugh. An NEWT-level potion. You ask me if I know it? Is this a joke, Mr. Shacklebolt? Kingsley cleared his throat and went on, more solemn. This wasn't an ordinary Draught of Living Death. We've tried every antidote we know. Nothing wakes the victim. Severus's expression tightened. Are you certain it was the Draught of Living Death and not something else? Our potion experts at the Ministry are certain, Kingsley answered. But the wizard who brewed it used exceptionally refined techniques. He amplified its effects in ways we can't counter. There are only a very few people capable of producing such a potion. We want to trace the source. Has anyone commissioned such a potent Draught of Living Death from you recently? Potent Draught of Living Death. Severus shook his head. If someone had placed an order for that specific effect, I would remember. I don't recall anything of the sort. Kingsley sighed but rose to his feet, thanking him. I'm sorry to have troubled you. If you learn anything, please contact us. Severus watched them prepare to leave without objection. Then, as Kingsley moved toward the door, Severus asked, "Have you spoken to the others?" "Before coming to you, we visited Arsenius Jigger and Horace Slughorn. They had no leads. Next we'll go to Libatius Borage," Kingsley said, naming the prominent potion masters. Severus inclined his head with little change in expression. "Very well. Good luck. If you're willing, Professor Snape, you could come with us to see the victim," Kingsley added as he paused at the doorway. "She hasn't awakened. We're trying to find an antidote. The Ministry will provide funds." Severus gave a small, non-committal sound. "If my schedule allows, I'll consider it." After Kingsley and his aura left, Severus allowed himself to relax. He sank into the sofa, a slight smile on his face, and addressed the quiet voice inside himself. "I told you, I know Dumbledore." The inner voice, the snide snarl of the ghost he carried in his head, had been silent for once. Severus's smile widened. He would never give me a task he thought couldn't be finished. "George and I have a grand dream. After we graduate, we want to open a magical joke shop together in Diagon Alley." On the way back to Gringotts, Harry heard the twins' bold declaration and nodded in admiration. "You haven't even started at Hogwarts yet, and you've already mastered this stuff. You'll definitely pull it off." George and Fred's faces lit up like flowers. "It's rare anyone believes in us. Don't worry, we'll scout Hogwarts for you first, Dudley." After leaving the joke shop, the three of them, Harry and the Weasley twins, felt like brothers. Percy, the outsider, stood to one side and deadpanned. "Professor Snape's private student needs you two to scout Hogwarts in advance?" The twins ignored him. They were used to their rule-bound, dull older brother. As Harry chatted happily with the Weasleys about all the wonders of the wizarding world, he suddenly felt someone watching him from the street. He glanced instinctively toward the stair. A small, bespectacled wizard met his eyes, blinked in surprise, and hurried into a nearby cauldron shop. Harry was puzzled. He was sure this was his first time in Diagon Alley. Before Severus had taken him from the Dursleys, he'd never met a single wizard. What was going on today? But Harry was only 9. He felt curious, but did not dwell on it. The twins' chatter soon recaptured his attention, and in the time Severus had set for them, they were back at Gringotts gates. Severus was already leaning against the doors, waiting. "Looks like you all got along?" he asked with a small smile. George called, "Can we invite Dudley to the burrow, Professor Snape? And you too. Mum's pies are brilliant, and Dad'll love Dudley. He's mad for Muggle machines." Harry looked at Severus with a hopeful expression. He'd never had a proper chance to make friends in the Dursley house. Severus blinked and spread his hands. "Am I supposed to thank you for the invitation? Rest assured, Dudley and I will visit. Just not now. After we leave Diagon Alley, we've still got business." Fred's disappointment was obvious. "All right." He brightened quickly, met George's eyes, and turned pleadingly to Severus. "Now will you keep your promise? Tell us, what challenge do Hogwarts first years face to be sorted? We're dying to know, Professor Snape." Severus pretended to hesitate, then sighed as if making a grave decision and beckoned them closer. "Very well. Since I promised, lean in. This is for your ears only, and you must keep it secret." Percy looked ready to speak up, but when Severus surreptitiously winked, he swallowed his words. George and Fred, oblivious to the warning, crowded nearer, and the once Death Eater, now the Slytherin head at Hogwarts, bent to whisper. Moments later, both twins looked stunned. George blurted, "That's it. We don't have to fight a dragon." Fred's eyes went wide. "Charlie lied? No one dies at the sorting." Severus only smiled. "It sounds simple, but few can truly face themselves. Remember, tell no one." A ghostly Snape, who had somehow heard every word, sneered, "Childish trick." The twins, already recovering, thumped their chests. "We swear, Professor." "Right, time to part. It's getting dark. Go find your mum." Severus patted Harry's shoulder. "Bye, George, Fred, Percy." Harry waved reluctantly. The twins stepped forward and high-fived him. "See you, Dudley. Come to the burrow any time." Percy gave Severus a stiff bow. "See you at Hogwarts, Professor Snape." Severus said no more. He watched them until they vanished down Diagon Alley, then took Harry to Madame Malkin's for 2 sets of robes, to a sweet shop for sickly candies, to a stationer for supplies, and finally to the leaky cauldron for dinner before they returned to their room. Lying in the impossibly soft bed, Harry felt the whole day had been a dream. That morning, Petunia had accused him of stealing cake from the fridge. By afternoon, he'd been shopping on a wizarding street, eaten 2 huge meals, bought ice cream with his teacher's money, and made 3 new wizarding friends. He glanced across at Severus, asleep in the other bed, his feelings tangled. In the alley, Severus had been terrifying, exactly the monster Harry had feared. Yet now, as his teacher, he felt like the calm, assured figure Harry had dreamed of, a kind of father he'd never had. What lay ahead? Traveling with his teacher, meeting new friends, then off to Hogwarts? The future suddenly looked bright. Harry sighed and let drowsiness carry him into sleep. After rain, the sky always seemed clearer. Early the next morning, Severus woke Harry, packed, and they set off again. At King's Cross, they boarded a train, changed once, and by late morning alighted in a town Harry had never heard of. Severus strode ahead. Harry, clutching his new clothes and small trunk, hurried at his side. Unable to hold back, Harry asked, "Sir, what are we doing here?" "Calling on my old teacher, Hogwarts retired potions master and former Slytherin head," Severus replied. "Just to visit?" Harry asked. "More than that." Severus produced the sweets he'd bought in Gun Alley and smiled. "We're inviting him back." "Back?" "Once I leave Hogwarts, someone must take over potions and Slytherin. Potions is easy. Any competent witch will do, but the Slytherins won't bow to just anyone. So Albus Dumbledore has given us a new task. Persuade former Slytherin head Horace Slughorn to return and take my place. 15. To continue Slytherin's glory. Horace Slughorn, celebrated potioneer, well-known socialite, and one of the oldest names in Britain's magical high society, had not hosted or attended a party in a week. His spirits had been low. A week before, he'd spent 3 days searching his house from top to bottom, and 2 more days calling in favors and answering questions with the network he'd built over decades. Now he sat at home, clutching his hair in worry. The morning had lifted bright and clear, and the gate of his old family manor was knocked by 2 uninvited guests. As one of the oldest wizarding families in Britain, the Slughorns naturally kept a house elf. Locke, having answered the knock, hurried to fetch his master. "Severus Snape?" the elf announced. Slughorn started. He had certainly not forgotten the name of his former pupil. Not only had Severus become a renowned potion master, but his identity 10 years ago had once been a source of dreadful alarm. Still, Slughorn, relaxed in his soft armchair, mumbled things like, "What is he doing here?" and "Haven't heard from him in years," and told Locke to bring the visitors in. Dumbledore had vouched for Snape at the trial after you-know-who's disappearance. Slughorn trusted Dumbledore's judgment. If Dumbledore said Severus was safe, Slughorn believed it. Soon the house elf led Severus into the drawing room, and accompanied by a boy not more than 10 years old. At the sight of Severus, Slughorn was stunned. Over the years, Severus's image had appeared in the magical press, the gloomy, brusque figure in black robes, unkempt and taciturn. This man standing before him wore his hair in a neat ponytail, dressed carefully, smiling blandly with clear, bright eyes. If his face hadn't been the same, Slughorn might have sworn it was a young Albus Dumbledore. "Professor Slughorn?" Severus greeted by stepping forward. "It's been a long time. I'm glad to see you're as vigorous as ever. Time hasn't left much of a mark." Slughorn's reaction was like someone who'd seen a ghost. He rose abruptly from his chair, hand sliding toward the wand on the coffee table. Locke stiffened at once. The boy, who had been watching the elf, startled too, and instinctively slipped behind Severus, half hidden by him. Severus blinked at Slughorn's alarm and smiled wryly. "Professor, I am Severus Snape." Slughorn's face immediately clouded over. "Stop playing at being Albus. I know it's you," he blurted, bewildered. Severus did not understand why Slughorn had mistaken him for Dumbledore, but he knew how to prove his identity. As a master of occlumency and one of the few with Severus's knowledge of potions, he could point to things only the real Severus would know. He mentioned private conversations from their school days and tapped a cauldron on the edge of the room, noting that the last thing Slughorn had brewed in it was likely a wit-sharpening potion. Those details finally made Slughorn accept that the man before him, despite the unfamiliar appearance, really was Severus Snape. "Unbelievable," Slughorn murmured, eyes roaming. "What on earth happened to you to cause such a change?" Severus watched him with a calm, distant air. "Everyone changes," he said, "especially after that event 8 years ago. She died in that disaster. After that, I slowly stepped out of my former self. At those words, a colder presence within Severus, the part of him that had watched everything with a detached, merciless gaze in earlier days, surfaced, briefly chilling the air. Harry, who sat on the sofa beside Severus, had no idea who Severus meant. Slughorn, however, understood only too well. He had always been fond of promising young talent, and among Severus's year, no one had been more gifted or more dear to him than the girl Severus alluded to. A shadow passed over his features. Locke placed a cup of black tea on the table for Slughorn, and Severus produced a large box of assorted magical sweets as a gift. Slughorn brightened immediately. Like Dumbledore, he was a devoted lover of anything sweet. "This change is good for you," he said, smiling now. "I remember how astonished I was when you first took a position at Hogwarts. You were only 21 then, and now you're 29, and I hear you've led Slytherin to win the House Cup and the Quidditch Cup 4 years running." "You never came to my parties after that," Slughorn added suddenly, shifting subjects. Severus answered simply, "I threw myself into teaching and potion research. I couldn't spare the energy. You can understand that, Professor." Slughorn accepted the explanation, though the colder part of Severus listened with impatient disdain. Slughorn settled back in his chair, sipping tea, and turned his attention to the boy beside Severus. The child looked familiar in some way, especially his eyes, though Slughorn expected a lightning scar somewhere and found none. "And this is?" he asked. "A child from a friend's family," Severus replied. "He isn't old enough for Hogwarts yet. I'm taking him traveling, seeing the world." "What's his surname?" Slughorn asked. Harry, taking the initiative, offered an alias. "Dursley, Dudley Dursley." At the unfamiliar name, Slughorn's interest cooled. He returned to chatting with Severus about things they both loved: recent discoveries in potion lore, rare ingredient purchases, amusing incidents at Hogwarts, and the Ministry's latest education reforms. When Severus mentioned that many of the younger wizards graduating now didn't even know who Slughorn was, the older man's voice took on a wistful note. "If only you would return to teaching at Hogwarts, Professor," Severus said casually, steering the conversation toward the reason he had come. "Hogwarts could use a wizard of your renown." Slughorn, smiling and patting his plump belly, waved the idea away. "Hogwarts isn't short of teachers these days." "Though the Defense Against the Dark Arts post," Severus interrupted. "It's not just a Defense Against the Dark Arts vacancy. They need a potions master and a dean for Slytherin as well." Slughorn froze for a heartbeat, then recovered and took Severus's next move. Without hesitation, Severus pulled a letter from Dumbledore from his cloak and handed it to him. "I thought you missed teaching, Professor. Hogwarts needs someone of your stature to help continue Slytherin's glory." Slughorn read the letter through to the end. He heard the sincerity in Severus's voice, the subtle urgency. Instead of smiling, however, his expression soured. "Go and turn yourself in, Professor." "No, I will not go back to Hogwarts. It doesn't matter who asks. Even if Albus Dumbledore himself came, the answer would be the same." Slughorn's face went cold. The genial expression he'd worn while chatting with Severus a moment before vanished, and the pleasant air in the drawing room froze. Severus had expected this. It was precisely why Ghost Snape, on hearing that Dumbledore wanted him to persuade Slughorn to return, had called the task impossible. If Severus were indisposed and unable to teach, leaving the school short a Slytherin head, and Dumbledore personally begged Slughorn to come back, the rotund man would almost certainly accept. It would be a triumph for his reputation. But Severus had asked Dumbledore for a leave of absence, temporary, 1 or 2 years, meaning he would return. Being invited now wouldn't be the glamorous permanent post Slughorn fancied. It would be a stopgap until Severus returned, and that would humiliate him. Severus had also read something else in the man's eyes: guilt and unease, buried under vanity. Severus folded his hands, met Slughorn's glare without heat, and asked quietly, "Professor, do you value what others think of you so much?" Slughorn snorted, the smile not reaching his eyes. "Ho, ho, ho! Do you know what the Slughorn family is? I represent more than myself. I represent a lineage, the honor of countless ancestors. I've never done anything merely for my own face, Severus. You wouldn't understand." Severus didn't, but he knew everyone had their reasons. He didn't press. He inclined his head politely. If Dumbledore were to go on the record to say I must recuperate for 2 years on medical grounds and beg you to return to Slytherin, Slughorn's expression hardened, and that would change anything. You'd still come back in 2 years. How would anyone see it then? He waved a hand. Look, you expect me to step aside as soon as you come back? They'll think I was just a stopgap. Who gains more, I ask you? Who would be the true potions master, and who merely a substitute? So, he spread his hands, why would I agree? Severus sighed, but kept his composure. I understand. It was presumptuous of me to ask. That politeness disarmed Slughorn. Few people could take a rebuff so gracefully. He leaned back in his armchair, rocking it and grinning. Then you'd better have Dumbledore look elsewhere. Perhaps there is someone in the wizarding world better suited than I. The atmosphere relaxed again. The house elf returned with tea and biscuits, and housekeeping noises resumed. Harry eyed a bowl of fresh grapes, debating whether to help himself. Just as it seemed the matter would be dropped, Severus asked, Professor, did Kingsley Shacklebolt come to see you a few days ago? Slughorn's relaxed mask slipped. He had not expected that question. He recovered quickly, though, fumbling for nonchalance. Ah, yes, he came to see me, as I suppose he came to see you? As he spoke, he plucked a cockroach cluster from a box of sweets. At that, Harry's hand stopped midway to the fruit bowl and shoved it into his mouth, chewing conspicuously to cover nervousness. Severus sat with his legs crossed, fingers laced over his knee, his smile still all civility. He found me at Gringotts yesterday afternoon, Severus said. He said it concerned a potion poisoning. Someone had given a muggle a potent draught of living death. A young woman now lies in a permanent sleep. The muggle world is in an uproar. They're searching for the source. Oh yes, Slughorn said with a practiced, shocked tone. Both the Daily Prophet and the other papers have been full of it. The Muggle Prime Minister has even put pressure on Millicent Bagnold for answers. Severus produced a copy of today's Daily Prophet. The front page screamed the story about the potion poisoning. Millicent Bagnold will be retired by next year at the latest. She's served 10 turbulent years as minister. Now, as she nears the end of her tenure, this scandal breaks. In an exclusive interview, she promised a full inquiry to find the perpetrator and uphold wizarding law, Severus continued. Slughorn tutted, prim and indignant. To use a potion to poison a muggle, what an insult to the art of potion-making. They must punish whoever did this. It's not only a breach between our worlds, but a violation of both our laws. Severus stared at him for 3 or 4 slow seconds. Slughorn grew restless under the gaze. Then Severus's lips curved, and he spoke quietly. So, Professor, when do you plan to turn yourself in? The room fell utterly silent. Harry, who had at last worked up the nerve to reach for a grape, jerked his hand and dropped it. Slughorn stiffened, as if hit with a full-body tickling hex. It was a long moment before he could force a smile. What? Are you joking, Severus? Why on earth would I turn myself in? What has this to do with me? I don't know who the culprit is, Severus said evenly, but that bottle of potion had to have been brewed by you. He let the accusation sit, then added, with perfect calm, It must have been you, Professor Slughorn. 17. Reputation trading. Do you have proof? Slughorn asked, feigning calm. Severus held his gaze. Professor, evidence or not, and however you fended Shacklebolt off when he came, a proper investigation of that potion will very likely lead back to you. At those words, Slughorn's hands, which had been resting complacently on the armchair, clenched the rests. Still, he kept up his bluster. I don't know what you're talking about, Severus. I've never brewed a draught of living death. If you think you can use this to blackmail me back to Hogwarts, you've miscalculated. This isn't blackmail, Professor, Severus said smoothly. There's no luck involved here. Millicent Bagnold is retiring soon. She won't let this become the last blot on her record. She'll see the matter cleared up by any means. You know that. Slughorn slumped in the chair, silent for a moment, unwilling to confess, but no longer arguing. Severus continued, unhurried. The Aurors have already narrowed the list. In the entire British magical community, no more than 5 wizards could brew a draught of that potency. You, me, Arsenius Jigger, Labatius Borage. The last 2 are mostly theorists who compile reference works. Their practical skill is far beneath ours, Severus finished. I don't know what you mean. Borage is South American and only visits Britain a month or two each year. He's easily ruled out. Jigger is a rigidly honest man. The Aurors will cross him off after a simple inquiry. Severus ticked names off quietly. With those two dismissed, who else remains? Zygmunt Budge? He was the greatest potioneer who ever lived, but he died in the 17th century. That was the final straw. Slughorn could stay silent no longer. I'm innocent, he burst. That draught was merely a private keepsake. Someone stole it. How could I know they meant to harm anyone with it? The drawing room fell so quiet that only Slughorn's heavy breathing could be heard. Harry, who had been hovering nearby, watched with widened eyes. He did not follow all the adult's nuances, but he understood plainly enough that this plump, walrus-mustached man had just admitted the bottled potion had come from his cauldron. Severus merely nodded gravely. I believe you, Professor. Whatever the circumstances, you would never set out to hurt someone. Slughorn stared at Severus for nearly a minute before snapping. Well, believe me or not, this is the situation. If the Aurors eliminate the other suspects and fix on you, Severus said quietly, what will people think? Even if you never sold the draught, what will they whisper behind your back? Severus waited until the older man's agitation had cooled slightly, then spoke again, low and certain. I can settle this for you, Professor. Settle it? Slughorn's voice prickled with hope and suspicion. How do you intend to settle it? Severus answered without hesitation. Put the draught on my account. Slughorn's face registered the proposal. You mean, be the scapegoat? When Shacklebolt or the Aurors come again, Severus went on, you can say you were covering for me. Say you knew I brewed that bottle. Few men could serve as a believable fall guy in this situation, but Severus met every requirement. A renowned potioneer whose skills surpassed most, known for experiments others could not readily replicate. Severus's expression darkened at the idea of taking the blame. Slughorn saw the calculation and realized, with a flutter of dread and relief, that Severus would be the perfect fall person. He did not agree at once. He studied Severus intently. What do you plan to do that requires you to leave Hogwarts for a while? Slughorn, who had been Dumbledore's contemporary, was no fool. He saw clearly now that Severus's pressing motive for wanting him back at Hogwarts was to be elsewhere himself. Slughorn had already guessed more than half the truth. This might be part of some scheme of Dumbledore's, or simply Severus's own wish to be away from castle walls for a time. Severus wore the small, dangerous smile he reserved for statements about himself. Life can't be lived entirely inside those castle walls, can it? The world is vast, and while I'm still young, I want to see more of it. Drawing a deep breath, Slughorn finally made a decision. If you can do as you say, he murmured, I'll return to Hogwarts and take your post. Severus was not surprised that the old man's vanity and prudence had carried him to that bargain. The poisoning scandal had shaken the British magical world. A muggle had been harmed and the statute of secrecy breached. Once it was discovered the potion had come from Slughorn's stores, whether he had released it deliberately or not, his reputation would be badly harmed. Severus's willingness to accept public blame did not mean he had no plan. It simply meant he would risk being suspected unless he could catch the real culprit first. Then tell me about that potion. What really happened? You intend to investigate the matter yourself? Slughorn asked, startled. I'll try, Severus replied. If I can catch the real culprit before the Aurors start digging at my trail, even if the draught is traced to my cauldron, there'll be reason to doubt it's mine. Slughorn sighed and recounted what he could remember. I must have brewed it by accident. By altering the formula and increasing the saprophoros bean slightly, it became a sleep almost permanent, a sweet modification, but nothing genuinely new in concept. I kept it with the ordinary potions and didn't label it specially. We had our monthly dinner at the club on the 13th. After that, it vanished. 2 days went by before I noticed, and no amount of searching turned it up. Only when I read the papers and Shacklebolt questioned me did I learn someone had taken it with ill intent. Who attended that evening? Severus asked. Slughorn rocked slowly, fishing for names. Far too many. You know how wide I cast my net, almost every notable name in Britain's magical world. Can you recall who went in and out of the cellar? That night the cellar served as temporary wine storage, People were in and out constantly, and since the draught wasn't particularly valuable, I hadn't locked the door. His answers yielded little. Severus pressed further. Any first-time guests that night? 7 or 8 newcomers. Slughorn said. Alvin's Fleck, editor of the Daily Prophet, Marvin Mack, the Comet Broom designer and his son, the commercial author Eldred Werple and his vampire friend, Gwendolyn Jones, former captain of the Holyhead Harpies, Donegan Tremlett, and a few of the Weird Sisters. You see, it was a mixed crowd. He shrugged. Even among first-timers, there was no common thread. Editors, writers, broomwrights, Quidditch players, musicians. The thief needn't even have been among them. Severus shook his head. No useful lead there. Another avenue would be needed. Since you refined the draught, he said, no one could brew an antidote faster than you. If you have the time, Professor, you might attempt one. Slughorn gave a rueful little smile. I began working on an antidote as soon as I heard it's the only recompense I can offer the victim. How long will it take? At least 2 weeks, Slughorn admitted. The modified draught contains some unusual components. Countering them is no simple matter. Then please waste no time, Severus said. With that, he prepared to leave, Harry trailing obediently behind him. At the door, Slughorn asked one last anxious question. Where will you go now? Severus slipped 2 bunches of grapes into Harry's roomy pockets with a faint, almost affectionate motion. To the Ministry, he said. 18. What are your thoughts? Harry, going to the Ministry of Magic? Are you that eager to walk right into their trap? On the walk away from Slughorn's house, Ghost Snape finally couldn't restrain his suppressed displeasure and spoke with a cutting tone. Severus, of course, knew what he was annoyed about. This greasy bat had taken none of what he'd said yesterday to heart and still refused to accept that the two of them were now, in some sense, one. Old Snape, use that head of yours you never wash and think for once. If I truly wanted to turn myself in now, would I have told Slughorn to wait for Shacklebolt to find him before admitting the potion was mine? Severus only thought, speechless. Ghost Snape hadn't failed to understand. He was asking on purpose, looking for an excuse to mock him. Perhaps you don't care at all about the reputation I've worked so hard to maintain, he snapped. That line made Severus laugh. Ha! Your reputation. Don't make me laugh, old Snape. You're a dirty Death Eater and a blatantly biased Slytherin head of house. What kind of reputation do you think you have? Even students like Percy talk behind your back. Ghost Snape's face fell. He had 1,000 sarcastic barbs, but now he couldn't form one. He merely listened as Severus continued in a colder tone. The one without a reputation was the old you. From now on, I won't let my own name become that stinking. When I travel the wizarding world, I don't want everyone whispering about me behind my back. That's undignified. I've taken the credit for that bottle of potion, but I won't confess to anything until I know what's happened. I have to find out the truth first. I'm going to the Ministry to find Shacklebolt. Since Slughorn offered no useful clues, I'll take the chance, before the Aurors trace the potion's source, to visit the victim. Perhaps I'll learn something. After a few more words, seeing Ghost Snape so furious he had shut his eyes and refused to meet his gaze, Severus stopped needling himself and let the matter rest. Harry, who had been stuffing grapes into his mouth as they walked, couldn't keep the question he had been mulling over to himself. Teacher, how were you so sure the potion belonged to that gentleman? Severus answered in a deliberately offhand way, because Dumbledore asked me to go and invite him back. Harry froze, grape halfway to his lips. Seeing his confusion, Severus explained. Remember the letter we found at the Leaky Cauldron yesterday? It was from Dumbledore, an invitation for Slughorn to take on my duties at Hogwarts. I was supposed to deliver it and coax that stubborn, fame-seeking old man into returning. If everything were normal, that would be a nearly impossible task. You heard it yourself. Slughorn would never accept replacing me. It would make him a laughingstock. Dumbledore may speak in riddles and have eccentric ideas, but he does not give people tasks that are fundamentally impossible. He must have known something I didn't. So what could make Slughorn sacrifice his reputation? That bottle of draught of living death, something not just anyone can brew, was the obvious answer. Harry nodded, half understanding. He was only 9 and had not lived through many of the things Severus had, but he followed enough to sense the logic. Severus, in the tone of an exasperated literature teacher assigning a reflection, asked, "So, do you have any insight, Harry?" Harry hesitated, then offered a tentative answer. "Are you trying to say, teacher, that when we face problems, we shouldn't lose heart, and if we face them actively, we'll always find a way?" Severus barked a short laugh. "No. I want you to remember that when you're dealing with Dumbledore in future, you ought to keep your wits about you." While Harry remained partly dazed, Severus led him away from the little town, his mouth curved in a rare, almost genuine smile. Later that day, on a grubby London street lined with crumbling buildings, a pub, and a graffiti-smeared wall, the two of them squeezed into a battered red telephone kiosk. Harry dialed the numbers 62442. As the dial spun back, a cold, efficient female voice came from above the booth. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and business." "Severus Snape and Dudley Dursley," Severus said. "We're here to see Kingsley Shacklebolt of the Auror office to assist in the investigation of a muggle poisoning involving a potion." Harry looked up at the ceiling in surprise. The other side of the kiosk was silent for a few seconds, as if confirming and preparing something. Then the voice returned. "Thank you, Professor Snape. Please take your badges and affix them to your clothing. Also, please keep an eye on the child." There was a clattering sound as two silver badges dropped from the slot where the telephone booth would normally return coins. Each badge bore a name. One said Severus, the other Dudley, with the words "Assisting Investigation" stamped beneath. They pinned the badges to their clothes, and the telephone booth shuddered. Harry's hand flew to the hem of Severus's cloak as the floor suddenly fell away beneath them. They were descending. The same bored voice offered a routine reminder. "Visitors to the Ministry of Magic are required to undergo inspection at the security desk and register their wands. The security desk is located at the end of the atrium." They sank for what felt like a minute, then light appeared. A golden glow touched their feet, spread up their legs, and finally bathed them entirely. They found themselves in a magnificent hall. "The Ministry of Magic wishes you a pleasant day," the woman said, her tone betraying nothing but procedural wariness. The phone booth door burst open, and Severus stepped out first. Harry, like a country boy in the city for the first time, stood staring at the grandeur around him for a few stunned seconds before he followed in Severus's footsteps. 19. Antidote Team. Passing through the bustling, magnificent atrium, Harry kept close behind Severus. He marveled at the stream of people, wizards hurrying through the ministry, some off to business, others heading for the lifts. A few younger witches and wizards recognized Severus and, surprised, greeted their professor politely. They threaded past the crowds heading for the Golden Gates and stopped at a desk marked "Security Check." Behind it sat a man in dark green robes, a copy of the Daily Prophet covering his face. A faint snore escaped the paper. Severus reached out and knocked on the desk. "I believe the lunch break is over, sir. Time to get back to work." The startled employee pulled the paper down. When he saw who it was, panic and embarrassment flickered across his face. "Professor Snape? What brings you to the ministry? Is there a rule forbidding Hogwarts staff from entering?" Severus asked lightly, proffering his wand. "Hurry with the procedure. I have someone to find." The man fumbled for the wand and placed it on a strange brass contraption that looked like a single-pan balance. The device whirred, vibrated, and spat out a narrow strip of parchment. 13.5 inches long, birch, with a snake nerve core. "Everything's in order, Professor." He handed the wand back as if it were made of spun glass. Severus glanced at a metal rod on the desk. "No other checks required?" "Of course not for you. This isn't your first time here. Who are you looking for this time? Want me to warn them?" The man half offered help. Severus waved the idea away. "I know where the Auror office is. If there's nothing else, good day." "Good day, Professor." The employee watched Severus's retreating back, still not quite comfortable with the polite tone. Severus led Harry, who knew the way, from the atrium on the 8th floor down to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement on the 2nd. As they arrived, a middle-aged wizard called out uncertainly, "Snape?" Severus smiled. "Long time, Robards." Although now the Dean of Hogwarts, Severus still had many contacts at the ministry, especially in the Auror office. 10 years before, when he had been a Death Eater, he had clashed with many of the Aurors. The present Auror office contained a generation who had once been his adversaries, and another who had been his pupils. Gawain Robards, an Auror of real standing, who had even attended Severus's trial, eyed the changed man warily. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for Shacklebolt. He consulted me yesterday about that potion poisoning case and asked if I would prepare an antidote." Robards studied Severus with suspicion still clear in his gaze. "Shacklebolt and a few others went to find Labacious Borage. He won't be back until 3. Severus glanced at the clock. It was about half an hour to 3. "Can we wait for him here?" he asked politely. Robards hesitated, then gestured. "Come with me. I'll take you to the lounge." They walked in silence. Harry felt the man's attitude was different from the respect others now showed Severus. This was caution, even hostility. The lounge beside the Auror office had sofas and refreshments. It was the place to wait. Robards' tone was sharp when he warned, "You know the rules. 2/3 of the rooms in this department are confidential. Outsiders don't come and go as they please. Don't make it hard for me, Snape." Severus lifted an eyebrow, picked up a biscuit from the table, and took a casual bite. "Of course we'll follow the rules. Right, Dudley?" Harry, intimidated by the hostile aura, nodded so fast it looked involuntary. Robards only relaxed enough to leave them to their waiting, then returned to his duties. Once he was gone, Harry leaned closer. "Teacher, why does that man dislike you so much?" Severus answered evenly. "When I was young, I nearly severed one of his arms, so badly it couldn't be reattached." Harry's eyes widened. The answer explained Robards' animosity. "But he still doesn't trust you, despite what Dumbledore says." Severus shrugged. After Voldemort's fall, Dumbledore had taken Severus under his protection, and Severus had been attached to Hogwarts. Many people still doubted the sincerity of his change. To some, his reform was merely a way to avoid punishment. Those suspicions lingered, Robards' included. But, Severus observed, being under Dumbledore's protection carried weight. They did not have long to speculate. At 3:02, the lounge door opened, and Kingsley Shacklebolt entered, looking surprised. "I didn't expect to find you here today, Professor Snape." "The morning's affairs went smoothly," Severus said, standing, "and I'm very interested in that bottle of potent draught of living death you mentioned, so I made a special trip." "Excellent. With you on board, we should cut days off the antidote's preparation." Kingsley looked busy the last 2 days. He poured a cup of tea and drained it before continuing. "We've also invited Mr. Arsenius Jigger. We're ready to go to the victim." "When do we leave?" "The ministry has someone stationed there. We need to wait for them to notify the family. Should be a reply in about 10 minutes. We can leave now and use the ministry fireplaces to get to Bristol." "Bristol?" Severus repeated. "Yes. The victim isn't an ordinary muggle. She's the daughter of an aristocrat. They have an estate and a horse farm there." Kingsley moved efficiently, leading Severus and Harry into the Auror office proper, where 2 Aurors, a ministry pharmacist, and the other invited potions master, Arsenius Jigger, were waiting. The pharmacist and Jigger greeted Severus with visible approval. Severus's reputation as a potions master still commanded respect. After brief introductions, the makeshift antidote team did not delay. At the fireplaces, each of them pinched a handful of flue powder and lined up in front of the emerald flames. Severus stayed at the end with Harry, repeating the destination and insisting on correct pronunciation before he let Harry throw in his flue. "Badminton Estate, Bristol." Harry's pronunciation was perfect. He vanished in the green fire. A moment later, Severus stepped forward. The flames swallowed him, and with one last glance back at the ministry, he disappeared toward the victim's home. 20. "Victim, do you even know how to use that thing?" "Am I a fool? An idiot? Didn't I graduate from Hogwarts?" "No, that's not what I meant." The young man, his face unnaturally pale, muttered under the cedar. Perched on a branch above him, a short wizard with spectacles had an alchemical telescope pressed to his eye, carefully watching the distant manor. The telescope, bought in Diagon Alley and made by special alchemical processes, had cost the short wizard a painful sum. He was in a foul mood over the expense, but it was worth it. Even from over 2,000 meters away, they could see the living room fireplace through the glass, and it was dark. "Will they be coming today?" the young man whispered. "If they weren't coming today, they wouldn't have needed those people yesterday." Honestly, Eld, he took a deep breath. Do you think we should? The short wizard cut him off. Shut up! They're here! The young man clamped his mouth shut as if sewn. We guessed right. Kingsley Shackled was leading them. The short wizard peered through the telescope at the figures stepping out of the fireplace flames. His two subordinates, Charn Savage and John Proudfoot, and that useless potioneer they've dragged from the ministry. Arsenius Jigger? They actually invited that idiot. If he's here, that's... Wait, that boy is from Diagon Alley. Why is he here? Who? The young man blurted. The short wizard watched the last figure emerge and at once held his breath. He stowed the expensive telescope and, surprisingly agile, scrambled down the cedar in a few quick movements. The young man's pallor deepened, and he swallowed hard. Who is it? Snape. Severus Snape. The short wizard spat the name like a curse. The young man stared in horror. You said he wouldn't agree to come. Logically, he hardly ever leaves that castle. Why on earth would he get himself involved in something like this? Why would he come? The short wizard ran his hands through his hair in agitation, his face darkening. He looked back up at the young man. We have to decide, Grip. Grip trembled. It's already blown up. Do we really have to? You started this. You make the decision now. The short wizard's voice was fierce. Silence fell, except for Grip's heavy breathing. After a long moment, his stammering stopped. Fine. We'll do it. This is what I promised. I promised. Severus brushed soot from his robes as he stepped out of the fireplace. The flue this time had been more sophisticated than the usual domestic setup. Harry, who had arrived ahead of the others, was staring up in awe at an enormous crystal chandelier hanging from the 8-meter ceiling. It was a noble's manor. Every piece of decoration whispered understated wealth and heritage. Even Severus, who had traveled, couldn't put a true value on all the furnishings. Kingsley had already introduced himself to the household wizards. He looked as if he'd just heard bad news. His expression was grave. If Muggle doctors can actually cure her, then what are we doing here? He muttered. A middle-aged man in a dressing gown entered the drawing room. He carried himself with a calm authority that belonged to landed gentry. Glad to see you again, Mr. Shacklebolt, he said. Good afternoon, Mr. Somerset, Kingsley replied, masking his irritation with a courteous smile. We've brought specialists in healing to attempt to rouse your daughter. Then I thank you for your efforts, Mr. Somerset said without warmth. And the culprit? Any leads? My colleagues are investigating. The ministry is treating this with the utmost seriousness. I believe we'll find answers, Mr. Somerset frowned. How did you get in? Why didn't you use the front door? My butler has been standing there like an idiot for half an hour. Kingsley let out a dry laugh. Perhaps he didn't see us. We didn't see him either. Must have missed each other. Mr. Somerset didn't press the point. He glanced at the robes the group wore, then at Harry, and muttered, A child too? Good heavens, what is the government doing? And your department's uniforms are distinctive. Is this where the taxpayers' money goes? He shook his head and turned away from Kingsley to the elderly butler standing nearby. Roster, you will accompany them. The butler bowed stiffly and watched his master leave. Kingsley leaned in and lowered his voice for the others. The Muggle Prime Minister's office arranged cover identities for us, experts from a special department that handles unusual incidents. They don't know who we really are. No one answered, but the ministry potioneer and Arsenius Jigger both looked offended. Their brows knotted. After a brief discussion with the owner, the butler led them to the girls' chamber. Inside, a Muggle doctor and 2 nurses operated some machines. Please step outside for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. We'll take over, the doctor said, astonished at the sight of people in strange robes. Under the butler's repeated apologies, the doctor and nurses set down their equipment and left the bedroom. Please close the door. Sir, you should step out as well. The butler insisted. I cannot leave. I must stay. You have no right to be alone with the young lady. Kingsley took a steadying breath. He glanced at his subordinate. The Auror understood and drew his wand. Confundo. The butler's eyes glazed for a fraction of a second, as if remembering something urgent. He turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. With the chamber cleared, the group moved forward to examine the girl on the large 4-poster bed. She was young, no more than 20, and strikingly beautiful, but her eyes were sealed shut, and her breathing was so faint it might have been absence. She looked almost dead. "Who goes first, gentlemen?" Kingsley asked, glancing at the 3 potioneers gathered there. The ministry employee and Arsenius Jigger turned their expectant looks toward Severus.